est faite?
Interpreters are ready. Yes, sir, interpreters are ready.
C'est bon pour la traduction? Je n'ai pas de réponse. Ok, mesdames et messieurs,
Ladies and gentlemen, honorable members, dear colleagues, distinguished guests, on behalf of His Excellency Chief Fotira Charumbera, President of the Pan-African Parliament, we wish you all most welcome to this session on the African Union theme of this year, that is the Building Resilience in Nutrition on the African Continent, Accelerate the Human Capital, Social and Economic Development. We are gratified to be here to start this workshop that is the result of the work between the African Union Commission, with AUDA NEPAD, FAO, and the Pan African Parliament that is organized in the premises of the Pan African Parliament. We'll take this opportunity to commend this cooperation and collaboration and thank all the organizations for this work. This important matter on nutrition and social and economic development that establishes links that is closely established with the development of our African continent. During the last decades, Africa has become more dependent on the agricultural products. However, Africa, with more 1.3 billion inhabitants, constitute a majority and made of a majority of the youth, can reverse the tendency of the food value chain with the empowerment of the youth and women in particular. Let's not forget that Africa imports each year agricultural products with a value of about 60 billion US dollars. If Africa was self-sufficient, it could with this sum of money, be able to finance long-term development projects. COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine are an alarming signal that shows the need for Africans to develop resilience in the sectors of health and social protection. Resilience is a key word, but it requires that we start thinking of the commitment to Malabo and Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 and the aspirations of Agenda 2063 in favor of expediting growth and transformation of agriculture in Africa for shared prosperity and better living conditions for the African peoples. Important progress has been certainly made at the global level, at the continental and regional, as well as national levels in terms of investment in nutrition and contributing to the economic, social, and cultural and human development. For example, at the level of the parliament, the issue of food security and nutrition rank high on the African agenda, of its agenda, by creating the Alliance of the African Food Security and Nutrition with the main objective of placing the issues of food security and sovereignty, as well as nutrition, as priorities on their national, regional, and sub-regional agendas. And the development of a model law on food and nutrition security in Africa, which is envisaged to make a significant contribution to improving food security and nutrition in the continent and to complement other African Union and regional efforts. However, substantial efforts are still needed to stem the scourge of malnutrition. This is where this workshop is important, with the goal of focusing on the theme of the African Union, the theme of the year of the African Union, and to promote the AU nutrition agenda through food security and nutrition.
The workshop has some specific objectives, among others, to facilitate broad-based and inclusive consultations and dialogue among all relevant stakeholders and policymakers to reach and map out practical solutions and pathways for accelerating the achievement of results. 2, to facilitate mutual learning and experience sharing among AU member states and AU recognized RECs and through the South-South and Triangular Cooperation Framework. And 3, to facilitate dialogue with Africa's strategic partners to demonstrate commitment and alignment of programs towards a harmonized action and mutual accountability. But in order to achieve these objectives, our workshop will be organized in 5 parts, and these 5 sections will be both physical presentations and virtual presentations. And so without further ado, let us begin our first session, which is going to focus on giving us some information via video feed, and I hope that our technical team will be able to show the video now. This is the first video, and this is a message from the Deputy Director for the FAO Africa office. Can we have the video, please?
Honorable Senator Chief and President of the Pan-African Parliament, Fortune Charumbira, His Majesty King Letsi II of the Kingdom of Lesotho, and a true nutrition champion, Excellency Ambassador Joseph Asako, Commissioner for Agriculture, Rural Development, Blue Economy, and Sustainable Environment of the African Union, Ms. Nardos Bekele Thomas, Chief Executive Officer of AU Development Agency NEPAD, honorable members of the Pan-African Parliament, I'm very pleased to join you at this workshop today in support of the African Union's focus this year on building resilience in nutrition in Africa. This theme is well aligned to FAO's work on nutrition and agri-food systems transformation. It also comes at an important moment when the African continent is faced with the challenges of rising hunger and malnutrition. According to FAO's latest report on the state of food security and nutrition in the world, 281 million people in Africa are undernourished. Close to 59 million African children aged under 5 years old suffer from stunting. 14 million suffer from wasting. Nearly 430 million Africans, primarily residing in rural areas, live in extreme poverty and cannot afford a healthy diet. The result is reflected in the widespread micronutrient deficiencies, but also overweight and obesity emerging as significant health concerns in many countries. What are some of the reasons behind these grim numbers? Climate variability and extremes, conflicts, and economic slowdowns and downturns have been identified as the main causes of food and nutrition insecurity in Africa. These drivers often overlap and are interconnected, compounding the food security and nutrition challenges. For example, populations in the Sahel and the Horn of Africa are increasingly exposed to natural hazards and climate-related disasters, food chain crises and conflicts, which frequently overlap and become protracted crises. This is further complicated now by the socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19 pandemic, as well as by global conflicts affecting the already vulnerable livelihoods and production systems, hitting groups including smallholder farmers, pastoralists, fisher folk, migrants, the urban poor, informal workers, internally displaced people, and communities, and women and youth. It's therefore imperative to support vulnerable communities with multifaceted and sustainable solutions to meet the aspirations of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and Agenda 2063. Building resilience is central to this effort. People with resilient livelihoods are better able to prevent and reduce the impact of shocks and disasters on their lives. They can better withstand damage, recover, and adapt when disasters cannot be prevented. FAO and its partners use an integrated approach at local, national, and regional levels towards building resilience in agri-food systems. For example, our approach to building climate resilience in agri-food systems is based on context-specific interventions aimed at preventing, anticipating, coping, and adapting to the effects of climate variability and extremes on food security and nutrition and livelihoods. These need to be gender sensitive, inclusive of a wide range of private and public actors, and with a strong focus on the most vulnerable and disadvantaged, such as youth and people with disabilities. A coordinated effort for anticipatory action and flexible funding is required to reduce the impacts of vulnerabilities to shocks and disasters. Investment in early action saves much needed financial resources that would otherwise be needed for emergency response and post-disaster recovery. In fact, FAO studies show that for every dollar invested in anticipatory actions, affected households see returns of up to 9 times as much in avoided losses and added benefits. FAO aims to dedicate at least 20% of overall emergency financing to anticipatory action by 2025. More investments in risk-informed and shock-responsive social protection systems are needed to address the vulnerability of livelihoods. FAO and partners work with communities at the local level to reduce and prevent resource-based conflicts through innovative conflict-sensitive approaches. These include improved and equitable access to natural resources, community cohesion activities, boosting resilient livelihoods, cross-border programming, and rural employment. Political will and support to communities are critical in targeting the marginalized, including women and youth. In this regard, parliamentarians play a critical role in influencing national policies to be pro-poor and focused on transforming agri-food systems to be able to deliver nutritious and safe food for all. FAO's vision is to support the transformation to more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable agri-food systems for better production, better nutrition, a better environment, and a better life, leaving no one behind. We therefore welcome our engagement and collaboration with parliamentarians and the African Union at large to turn this vision into reality for African people. I thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much to the Director General for this very clear message about the current situation regarding nutrition in Africa. And we can see that it is not enough. 204 million people have nutrition issues in Africa. Millions of children have illnesses related to nutrition, and the Director General has called for speedy reactions, an integrated approach in order to be able to improve nutrition in Africa. I would now like to move on to the second speech by the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Madame Gerda Verburg. Technicians, will you please play the message?
She is coming in live.
Nutrition movement, and 44 countries in Africa are a member of the Sun movement, meaning that the government is committed to prevent malnutrition and to invest in children through better nutrition in food, in health system, in education, in social protection. It's a matter of collaboration between sectoral departments, but also with stakeholders. And building on this, I would like to start by commending the organizers, the Pan-African Parliament, by putting this issue on the agenda. And I praise you because you had a lot of troubles to overcome. And today this workshop is happening. And I hope it will be recorded so that it can be watched by many members of parliament, because parliaments have an important role to play. And this is the introduction, and I'm extremely happy to be here, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, organizers, and participants. I would like to make 7 points. And my first point is on finding the opportunity in the crisis. Because as my colleague from FAO has already mentioned, the current situation is coming on top. No, I think it was the introductory remarks that the moderator made when we had already the impact of COVID, and on top of this, the food and nutrition crisis coming together with the fuel and fertilizer price crisis. But in every crisis, there is also an opportunity. And as Sun Movement started 12 years ago, we're always looking for the opportunity. And here is the opportunity. Instead of importing every year food at worth $60 billion in Africa, would be much better to look around per country, but hand in hand as African countries, look around and ask yourself, where can we be more self-reliant? How can we improve our food production, our food value chain, and the whole chain from food production to consumption? How can we improve our own food system? And how can we make it more nutritious? And how can we make it more climate resilient? And how can we make it more income producing? Because farmers and food producers want to have and need to have a decent income. Otherwise, they will not be able to continue to escape poverty. So look at the opportunity, and this is the moment to start to have, as members of as parliament in your country, the conversation with your government. And for this reason, I'm extremely proud to be here and to introduce to you the IPU, FAO, Sun Movement, UNICEF, and other handbook on food systems and nutrition. It has been written and finalized in 2020, and it's very much up to date. So if there is one message, two messages you want to take away from my contribution is make sure that you get the handbook, the IPU, FAO, SUN, UNICEF handbook on food systems and nutrition, because that will be your Bible if you are really focusing on getting results and being effective as parliament. The second is the best moment to start to invest in your own food and nutrition security was 20 years ago, but the semi-best moment is right now. And let me elaborate a little bit how how we suggest, but it's also written in the handbook. Most of the things are written in the handbook, but from our Sun experience, let me add a few things. My first suggestion would be read, of course, the handbook. My second is look around in your own country, what is already there. As I said, 44 African countries are a member of the Scaling Up Nutrition movement. They have already a human infrastructure, a Sun Movement focal point on behalf of the government. They have several focal points in the departments, agriculture and food, in fisheries sometimes, in health, in education, in development planning, in social protection. So build on them. Many countries, African countries, also made a commitment during the UN Food Systems Summit last year in September. And these countries, and most of your countries are involved, are developing their own country food systems pathway to rethink and reshape their own way of producing, processing, and consuming food to make it people friendly, but also climate friendly, human friendly, climate friendly, and rewarding for the people who are working in the food sector. So please look at this and build upon what is already there, because it will prevent that you will start from scratch. I very much embrace your ambition to develop a model law for all African countries. Now, I have three suggestions for you. There are three layers. The first is make sure that you have food and nutrition security embedded in your constitution, because it's a human right, and getting it there is the foundation to build upon. The second is that you look at framework laws. What do I mean with framework laws? You know better because you are already a member of parliament. But for instance, when it comes to the national development plan, you need to make sure that the different departments are coming together, that they make a coherent plan, that they include food and nutrition security, and that each department, each minister is involved, and that there is a clear connection with the Ministry of Finance, because if you want to get something done, getting it into laws will not be the only thing. It's only the first step. It needs to be executed. Plans need to be implemented. Laws and legislation needs to be implemented in order to impact the people we all have in mind. And the third layer are the sectoral laws. What do you need to improve or change in your food production and food consumption laws? What do you need to change, improve in your social protection laws if you want to include the access and affordability of nutritious meals? What do you need to add to your humanitarian laws and to your health laws? So it's this three steps approach that can be very helpful: constitution, framework laws, and then the sectoral laws. My fifth remark is on the roles parliaments can play. And my strong plea here is don't go as one member of parliament, but make sure the parliament as an institution, democratic institution, because you're all elected, that you are using the power of the parliament and not only you as a member of parliament. Get the whole parliament behind you, because then you have the institutional influence. The first role parliaments can play is representing people when it comes to the need. So talk about it, have your speeches about it, about the need and the opportunity for your country to become less dependent when it comes to food and nutrition security and be much more self-reliant, investing in the future of all people, while at the same time investing in the development of your country and the climate resilience. The second is, of course, legislation, and I have explained this in my previous point. The third point is making sure that there is enough budget to invest. And that's easier said than done, because many African countries now are heavily indebted, and it's about time that African governments make strong pleas at the UN General Assembly and at the autumn meetings of the World Bank to do something about debt relief, because that's the only opportunity for African countries to really invest in the future of their people, their community, their society. And the fourth is oversight. Parliaments have the oversight. They need to control the government, and they need to see whether the government has followed up as they have promised. Easier said than done, but I have been a member of parliament myself. I've been a minister, and I know how important this part is, just like all the other parts are. The sixth remark is on your suggestion on sharing and learning. I couldn't agree more, because as Sun Movement, we are organizing 65 member countries plus 4 Indian states all over the world. And the most inspiring thing is sharing and learning. How has Senegal, how did Senegal do it? How did Cote d'Ivoire do it? How did Ghana did it? How Botswana, Rwanda? So learn from each other and build upon each other's experience for good and inspiring lessons, but also to avoid to repeat negative lessons and negative experiences. So share good examples, but also the bad examples. And let me offer this: as Sun Movement, we can be extremely helpful for you to have a mechanism, and we're working closely together with the FAO e-learning academy, which is virtual learning, making use of the technology that is already there. So please dare to ask, and we will be extremely happy to work with you. Finally, I also embrace your suggestion, and I hope it will happen, to make sure that food and nutrition security will be embedded in the work of the regional economic committees. Because in the end, food and nutrition security is a human right. It is a condition for human and social development, social economic development, but it is also an economic need. Because on average, due to malnutrition, on average, every African country is losing could gain 11% of GDP if malnutrition would not be there. So right now, GDP countries are losing 11% of their economic growth potential. And if you would be able to prevent hunger and malnutrition, the gain would be at least 11% of extra economic, socioeconomic growth. So, having said this, please make this also happen and continue to look at the opportunity in this big crisis. Finally, I would like to recommend you as Pan-African Parliament to make sure that in the General Assembly of IPU in Kigali in Rwanda, food and nutrition is at the core of the agenda. It requires investment in order to cover the next 100 years. It's not done in an overnight. So please make sure that it's on the agenda. And finally, encourage your government, your president, your ministers to ensure that food and nutrition security and debt relief is also dealt with during the UN General Assembly and the World Bank autumn meetings. Last point is that right now we are in August. The African Year of Nutrition is an important step, but maybe Africa will not reach the ambitions by the end of this year that everyone has in mind to be reached and be there as an outcome. Please consider to extend the African Year of Nutrition until somewhere middle next year or the end of next year, because it is important to invest in your food and nutrition systems and security and get the foundation right for a shining future for all African countries, leaving no one behind. Thank you so much for having me.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much for your very wise words. And thank you also for offering us the opportunity through your organization to work with you. And what I have taken from your presentation is that crisis can offer opportunities, and we need to seize these opportunities in our respective countries. And as members of parliament, we have to work together and not try to achieve things individually. And we are representatives of the people, and we need to defend their needs. And our role is not just to pass laws, but to make a difference in their lives. And in terms of nutrition and food security, we have to ensure that these become a priority topic in every meeting, whether nationally or continentally. So we have to put the emphasis on food security and good nutrition. And the members of parliament have to put pressure on governments to make it a priority in their budget and in their programs. And you also stressed that this year we are in the year of nutrition, and that this would be extended to next year. And we are delighted to hear that. So thank you very much to you, Madam Gerda Verburg. Thank you for being with us today. We are now going to move on to the third speech, and this is by the African Union Development Agency, AUDA NEPAD. And I'd just like to find out if Mrs. Bekele Thomas is with us today or virtually to make her speech.
Ms. Thomas is not available. I am going to be representing the AUDA on her behalf. Unfortunately, due to conflicting schedules, she could not be with us here today. I'm joining virtually, but I hopefully shall be coming in person a little earlier to moderate the other session. A very good morning, Excellencies, honorable guests, honorable parliamentarians, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. I wish to note to you that the AUDA NEPAD is very much committed to ensuring that the Year of Nutrition and Food Security for building resilience is observed not just by the organizations or the agencies or the regional economic communities, but indeed by all countries across the continent. Only if we work together, only if we ensure that countries understand the importance of nutrition and food security, can we start to see a positive trajectory in the development of Africa. The Africa Year of Nutrition actually comes at a very opportune time when, as mentioned by the previous speakers, we are facing multiple challenges. The challenge of the war, the conflict in Ukraine that is affecting many things, including the cost of fuel, the cost of food, the cost of fertilizer, and coupled with the COVID-19 pandemic, which has actually shown the cracks in our societies, the cracks in how our political landscape and how our socio-economic landscape is structured, and the cracks that are actually affecting those that are already in the doldrums in this regard. And one other C I would like to add here is that of coordination. Why am I mentioning this? In many situations, we find that nutrition has been pushed or looked at as the purview of one sector. But nutrition, ladies and gentlemen, honorable guests, is actually a very multisectoral, interdisciplinary issue that should be looked at, as Gerda said, also from a social protection point of view. I want to remind us that, Africa, as we all know, Dr. Bebe has already alluded to the statistics in this regard, that we are not spared as a continent of hunger, food insecurity, and continuing malnutrition over the years. That has been fueled lately by the 4 or 5 challenges as mentioned. But one of the major challenges, if I may put it to you, that hunger and malnutrition continue is because of the broken food systems. Our food systems are broken and they need to be fixed in one form or other. So how do we address the broken food systems in Africa? We can take advantage of the just ended UN Food Systems Summit, wherein there were action areas and coalitions set up to address the different areas of action and the different areas of challenges across the globe and across Africa. And we should also be taking advantage and leveraging the fact that Africa actually came up with a common position of food security and nutrition. There are some very important points that should be looked at and actioned by all member states in Africa. And now we should be taking advantage of the very year of nutrition and food security to further buttress the importance of taking action at grassroots level and across the different levels of action across the different sectors as well. Now, AUDA NEPAD, ladies and gentlemen, under the leadership of Mrs. Thomas Becken, has confirmed and further committed to ensuring that nutrition remains high on the agenda for the continent. It is one of the 4 main priorities, so to confirm. Now, let me speak a little about the reality that we face when we talk about hunger and malnutrition on the continent. 30 out of 41 countries struggle with all the 3 forms of malnutrition, namely undernutrition, macronutrient deficiencies, and overweight and obesity, leading to non-communicable diseases. Now, when we have to decide where to put your dollar to address any kind of malnutrition, which one do you pick? There's no choice to be made. We have to address all of them in equality. Now, the shocking reality also is that the poor diet and malnutrition cost countries billions of dollars annually. It's been recorded, or rather noted, that malnutrition costs billions of dollars a year and imposes high human capital costs, direct and indirect, on the individuals, families, communities, and nation states. It is estimated by the World Bank and other actors here that malnutrition in all its forms could cost its society up to $3.5 trillion per year. That's money, Excellencies, honorable guests, that Africa cannot afford to lose. Not any country can afford to lose. With overweight and obesity alone, we are talking about in the neighborhood of $500 billion cost per year. If we were to prevent these atrocities, we could stand to gain, as Heather noted, somewhere between $16 to even $30, depending on the kind of malnutrition we are dealing with. Now, another harsh reality, and I'm bringing these statistics, ladies and gentlemen, to just also sensitize and continue to sensitize us of the fact that we are dealing with a really huge task here, that we cannot continue to sweep under the carpet and bury our heads in the sand. In Africa, the reality is that the triple burden of malnutrition, in terms of undernutrition, 55 million children under 5 are stunted. That's 31% of the population. Furthermore, 14 million children under 5 are wasted, counting for 17% of total children. And 10 million children under 5 are overweight. Now, we cannot afford to have children that are overweight eating McDonald's, KFC, instead of eating nutritious, traditional, indigenous, and local foods that are highly nutritious, well known by the local people, well understood, and they are known for their culture, their tradition. In terms of overnutrition, 40% of adult women are overweight and 16% are considered to be obese. Sitting here in South Africa, ladies and gentlemen, I can attest to you, as research has shown, about 52% of South African women are obese, overweight and obese. That we are now teetering on a highly explosive situation if it is not contained. And 24% of adult men are also not spared of overweight and obesity. Now, in terms of macronutrient deficiencies that are of public health importance, we are talking about 38%, whereby women of reproductive age are anemic due to iron deficiency anemia. Furthermore, vitamin A deficiency and iodine deficiency and zinc deficiency are also a huge problem, accounting for more than 28%, if I stand to be corrected. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what can we really be looking at as we look at the opportunities at hand that parliamentarians as key actors can play amongst other actors, such as policymakers in their different formats from different sectors, such as program implementers, who are very important, and farmers and farm associations to be able to address the food systems that I spoke about. Community leaders, very important, as influencers and as leaders in their own right. The private sector has to be also brought to bear to be able to produce and to supply nutritious foods, and for us to be able also as consumers to start demanding nutritious foods from the private sector. Civil society has a very important role to play, and also the media, their role in advocacy, their role as communicators, their role as messengers, and their role as really making sure that those messages are getting to where they are most needed. And at the helm of all this, we cannot ignore the role of scientists, the role of researchers, teachers, trainers, and educators, because they are the ones who are leading the way to build and to provide us with the evidence that we need to set the policies and to translate those policies into muscles and parcels that we can chew for better delivery for nutrition. Now, looking at the whole band of nutrition from womb to tomb, as the question goes, we know that at every step of development, human development, across and around the development cycle, we know that different age groups require different nutrients. We normally talk about the first 1,000 days as being very critical, a very critical window of opportunity, of which if it is lost by the time that child is 2 years of age, it might be too late to reverse the damage. So we need to be looking at the first 1,000 days, but after 1,000 days, what do we need to do? We need to look at a further 8,000 days in terms of implementing equitable school meals programs, homegrown school feeding programs that are going to ensure that children are brought to school, the girl child is not disadvantaged, and the youth are actually engaging in these opportunities, and they are given the food security and nutrition they need for their brain development, socioeconomic development, for them to be valuable members of society. Now, what are some of the opportunities at hand and the key takeaways that I can leave with you this morning, ladies and gentlemen? Like I mentioned, we have had the UN Food Systems Summit outcomes. Let's leverage on those. Let's make sure that the actions are taken forward and that all countries are really held to account in terms of how they are taking advantage of the UN Food Systems outcomes and how they are actually leveraging the actions and using the coalitions in this regard. Let us make sure that the Africa Year of Nutrition is not just a year. In my view, every year should be a year of nutrition, food security, and reduction of hunger. Let us also take advantage of the outcomes of the G7, the G20, the AU summits, the technical dialogues, the policy advocacy engagements, as well as the outcomes of the COP. And let us also build up our data and information systems so that we can engage better the different sectors that are critical and pivotal towards implementing food and nutrition actions on the ground. Now, my 5 key takeaway messages this morning would be that there is critical need to invest appropriately and contextually in the specific research that should be yielding the key outcomes, key messages for implementation. And we should also ensure that in this context of the research, we also try to domesticate our traditional, indigenous, and local foods, and so that the neglected and underutilized species are actually brought to bear in addition to exotics. Secondly, let's ensure a multisectoral, integrated approach and coordination from research to pedagogy, to policy, to program and implementation. Thirdly, let's invest and increase our national budgets. And this is linking to the point of investments. Let us invest more in horticulture products in addition or beyond just the normal staples. And let's look at fisheries, livestock, and wild products because they all have value addition in our food baskets and in our food systems. Fourthly, let us educate our consumers so that we can create a demand-driven culture for nutrient-dense products. And fifthly, let us understand the linkages between climate change, soil health, food production, for healthy diets and nutrition, for better livelihood and for better productivity and for better human, social, and economic development. And as we move forward, ladies and gentlemen, let us also not forget the critical role that the youth and the women have to play, and not forgetting those marginalized communities and those underserved, disadvantaged communities. Let us bring them into the dialogue. Let us bring them into the planning. Let us bring them into the solution seeking, because they also, as people feeling the heat, they also have something to give. They also have solutions that we all can share. They also have the technological know-how vis-a-vis the indigenous knowledge systems that we should infuse with the modern knowledge systems to bring about a very workable solutions and workable actions. And in my ending, let us just say, if we eat better, we can do better, we can act better, we can learn better, and we can develop better. A healthy people, a healthy planet yields a healthy society, yields a healthy Africa, and yields a healthy global movement. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and wish you a fruitful deliberation in this very important workshop. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam, for your communication, for your presentation. That recalled that nutrition was a priority on AUDA NEPAD's agenda. And you also mentioned that nutrition and food security were interdependent and interdisciplinary. That is, that we need, that action is required from not only the parliament, but also the researchers, the media, and the ministries. And you also concluded your presentation by 5 messages that I can recall here. That is the importance of investing adequately on research, the integrated move, an integrated approach and coordination, importance of national budgets, and to understand also that there is a link between climate change and nutrition. You concluded by saying that for the future, the central roles that should be played by women and the youth should be borne in mind. This presentation brings our first session to the end. Let me recall here that the handbook referred to by Madame Gerda will be discussed during our 4th session, session number 4. Let's move on now to our session 2, during which we will present the African Union theme for 2022. Let's invite Mr. Gatgord Kai, who's the technical coordinator for disaster risk reduction at the Department of Agriculture, Rural Development, Blue Economy and Sustainable Environment of the African Union Commission. The floor is yours, sir.
Of the Pan-African Committee on Rural Economy, honorable members of Pan-African Parliament, distinguished audience, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I hope my presentation is being shared, but I will also use my computer. Distinguished honorable members of this August House, I will be presenting on the concept note for the theme of the year, strengthening resilience in nutrition and food system on the African continent, and looking at agro-food system health and social protection. But being really somebody coming from a crisis management background, I would argue that addressing nutrition in isolation is counterproductive. And if we have to address food security and malnutrition, we have to look at the drivers of malnutrition on the continent. And as it was mentioned earlier by one of the speakers, malnutrition has been increasing on the continent. And having access to one of the reports, the increase has started from 2010 to 2019, and most regions are also increasing, but Eastern Africa in particular has been increasing exponentially. And you can relate that because in Eastern Africa, there have been severe drought, also conflict, especially in the Horn of Africa. So these are major drivers of food security, food insecurity, and malnutrition. It is until we are able to address these major drivers, and then we'll be able to have resilient food systems and nutrition. And consistent with that report, which actually is the cause of hunger report, in 2015, 2018, the African Union undertook a comprehensive reporting on the status of disaster risk on the continent. And again, we found that the risk profile for the continent is high, and Eastern Africa in particular has a very high risk index. So this shows consistency between this nutrition report as well as the drivers that are driving a nutrition crisis on the continent. So as I said earlier, some of these issues are driven by climate change. And climate change, indeed, and land degradation, biodiversity loss, and conflict are major drivers of vulnerability, food insecurity, and acute hunger. And of course, recent rise in epidemics with COVID-19, Ebola in some spots of Africa has also been a key driver of food insecurity. In recent years, we have seen rise in pests and diseases, fall armyworm, desert locust invasion, also affecting mostly the Horn of Africa region. So you could see the consistency of these drivers. So building resilience in nutrition and food system depends on the actual reduction of vulnerability. And already the African Union has put in place programs and strategies to build resilience on the continent. And I would argue it is the implementation of these strategies that will be able to achieve sustainable food system and resilient nutrition. I will list some of these strategies, but the list cannot be exhaustive. One of these strategies is the Africa Regional Strategy for Disaster Risk Reduction. The Program of Action for the Implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-2030, and that focus on understanding risk, strengthening disaster risk governance, risk financing for resilience, and issues of preparedness and early warning systems, as well as building back better. The African Union Climate Change and Resilience Strategy Framework, as well as Action Plan 2022 and 2032 to 2032. Integrated Africa Regional Strategy on Meteorology, Weather and Climate Services. The Malabo Declaration on Comprehensive Agriculture Development Program. The Post-Conflict Reconstruction and Development of the African Union, Silencing the Gun in Africa, as well as Africa Nutrition Strategy 2015-2025. A coordinated and expedited implementation of the Agenda 2063 is key to building a resilient Africa. And I would agree with people who presented earlier, choosing this year as a year of nutrition and a resilient food system is a reminder for us in the continent to accelerate the implementation of these strategies to be resilient. In hindsight, honorable members, this year, after the declaration of the theme of the year, different departments and agencies on the continent have sat together to develop a roadmap for the continent. And this roadmap contains some key priority activities. I will list these activities, but again, the list cannot be exhaustive. One of the activities is a high-level launch of the theme of the year on nutrition at the Assembly of Head of State and Government in Addis. This has been achieved. The other activity is the sixth high-level dialogue on the margins of the AU Summit on the theme of the year, and that was entitled Developing African Human, Social, Economic Capital by Increasing Resilience of African Girls Through Quality Nutrition and Education. Again, this activity has been achieved. The other activity is develop a communication and advocacy plan for the AU theme of the year on nutrition. This is also in place. The PIB activity here is also the Africa Day of the school feeding celebration. This has also been done. Activity number 6 is popularize AU policy and strategic policy documents on nutrition and advocacy for implementation of the recommendation. This is an ongoing activity. 7 activity is host physical multi-sectoral dialogue on early child nutrition, socio-economic and human capital development in Africa with regional economic communities. This was taken place 25 to 26 April this year. Another activity was to host virtual technical meeting with WFP supporting this on data and accountability. And it had 2 aims. One was to showcase the tools and analytics that are existing. And second was on financial planning and tracking of the implementation of the nutrition activities. The other activity was to develop the African Union Regional Nutrition Communication and Advocacy Strategy 2022 to 2025. This is an ongoing activity. Another activity was to develop funding targets for nutrition investment on the continent. This is ongoing activity. There was also this activity of championing engagement, including enlisting additional nutrition champions in selected countries, and also including publication of this through existing media events. This is also going on. Develop a white paper on homegrown school feeding and nutrition. This is an ongoing activity. There was also activity planned for the 13 African Task Force for Food and Nutrition Development, a work plan covering the period 2022 to 2025. This is also an ongoing activity. A side event on nutrition during the AU Humanitarian Summit and Pledging Conference in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea, was organized under the theme Building Resilience and Nutrition. What is it and why now? This was also done for those of us who participated in Malabo. The other activity was to organize a high-level consultative forum to develop consensus on cost-effective intervention to address malnutrition. This is an ongoing activity. The other activity was high-level advocacy event on nutrition to be organized by the AUC, government of Cote d'Ivoire. I think this is still ongoing. Then the launch of the AU reports. The following reports were planned to be launched, and I think they were launched already. One of them is the African Union Continental Nutrition Report, the Cause of Hunger Continental Report, midterm review of Africa Regional Nutrition Strategy, the Africa Regional Overview of Food Security and Nutrition, develop guidelines for private sector investment for better nutrition, and organize high-level event to present the guidelines. Advocate for prioritization of adolescent nutrition was also one of the activities planned for this year, and commemoration of the Africa Day for Food and Nutrition Security celebration, which is going to be done on the 30th of October 2022. Training of focal person from member state on CAADP indicator. CAADP stands for Comprehensive Agriculture Development Program. And there are a number of indicators related to that. One of them is ending hunger and resilient indicators as well, and supporting the biennial review process of the CAADP process. Training of focal person from member state on Africa health is statistic indicators. I would end this recommendation, Your Excellencies and honorable members, on two recommendations. One, as part of the activity for this year, the organizations that are supporting the theme of the year are planning to all visit, to have a planned visit and briefing to the Pan-African Parliament. And I believe people responsible will be in touch with the administration of the Pan-African Parliament to have furthermore briefing on the theme of the year and the progress of the implementation of the roadmap and the activities I've just highlighted. The second recommendation I would like to make is that in light of increased risks and crisis, as mentioned earlier, Pan-African Parliament has a role, and it will need to deploy its legislative prowess to advance resilient building on the continent, including encouraging national parliaments to prioritize resilience in budgetary allocation. I thank you, Your Excellencies.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Galcotte, for this presentation. And we are now going to have some questions and answers. And this speech has reminded us all that the malnutrition has increased significantly since 2010 in Africa, particularly West Africa, and it led to an exhaustive report by the African Union on the issue. And this report underlined the fact that these nutrition issues were because of climate issues, because of illness, including Ebola, and because of conflict also. And he has stressed the fact that we need to put all strategies in place to be able to combat malnutrition. So this doesn't just involve nutrition, but also climate change and all other factors that affect nutrition. And contact will be made with the administration with regards to the roadmap that the AU has designed. And we finished off with a recommendation whereby all members of parliament should use their powers and their abilities to make sure that this is placed high on the agenda and that a budget is attributed to this. So it is now time for questions and answers. Raise your hand if you would like to ask a question or make a comment.
Chairperson, I'm happy that you are saying it's questions and answer, but also comments. I want to make a comment. My comment relates to the drivers of malnutrition and food insecurity. I greatly appreciate the speeches which were made, which are very useful. But I'm concerned about the fact that foreign ownership of land and its natural resources, as well as ownership of land and natural resources by former colonial settlers are not mentioned as part of the drivers for malnutrition and food insecurity, because before colonization, African people were able to produce food, and they understood the climate, and that's why African people had their own calendar which regulated agriculture, culture, and everything. But today, African people are using the Western calendar, which is not consistent with the situation on the continent. And I think that we need to make a study into the impact of foreign ownership of land and its natural resources on food, on malnutrition, and food insecurity on the continent. But I also am concerned about the fact that the AU themes are not linked to one another, or visibly not linked to one another. And also the fact that today we are talking about a new AU theme for 2022 without receiving country reports of what happened to the 2021 theme, which said arts, culture, and heritage levers for building the Africa that we want. But the 2022 theme talks about food security and social and economic development. But by not linking the two themes, we will lose sight of the fact that social development is based, or should be based, on arts, culture, and heritage, which were the theme for the 2021 theme. And I think, without taking much of your time, it's important that we also recall what the founders of the AU said. In 1970, President Seratse Khama of Botswana said that a people who don't know their history and heritage are a people without a soul. And he was supported by President Mandela, who said that a focus on political and economic issues without the focus on arts, culture, and heritage is a problem, because the arts, culture, and heritage are the mainstay of the African soul and social power. And therefore, social power must be at the center of our efforts to deal with malnutrition and food insecurity. And as I conclude, Chairperson, I must say that we must avoid a situation where this Pan-African Parliament becomes just a talk shop, because without receiving country reports on the implementation, we are not anything more than a talk shop. And I must commend the president of the AU, of the PAP, Chief Fortune Charumbira, because last year he attended a Mapunguye Heritage Roundtable in Pretoria, where he addressed us on the AU theme for 2021. And that round table identified Mapungubwe, which is the oldest African city on the continent before colonization, as a project which could be used for cultural, social, and economic integration of the SADC region. So I'm concluding by appealing that maybe this committee and PAP should support that Mapungubwe project and also support the Pan-African People's Institute, PAPI, which has been established to make sure that, as recommended by the speakers here, to make sure that we involve communities, intellectuals, NGOs in popularizing the AU policy and the work of this parliament. I thank you for your indulgence, but I just thought I should point out some of the gaps that should be addressed as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I would like to propose that we record the number of hands that have been raised, and then we can allow everybody to make their comments or ask their questions before giving a chance to the speakers to respond. Do we have on the right-hand side any questions or comments? Are we finished on the right-hand side? Okay, we're going to come to the left later, but please go ahead in the meantime.
Merci, monsieur. Merci, monsieur le.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. This morning, we have been listening to many speeches about strengthening nutrition and improving nutrition across the continent. And I have something to say on this matter. In terms of point 1, we know that the principal factor in food insecurity on the continent is conflict and wars. And this has really created a problem in terms of agriculture and food supplies. And to make food security a priority on the African continent, we need to do something about the insecurity that affects so many of our citizens. And we have to develop coherent policies to strengthen nutrition and food security in our countries. We need to create an environment that is conducive to putting in place the appropriate systems for nutrition and food security. We need to guarantee access to good food and good nutrition to all our communities, despite any kind of natural or man-made disaster or conflicts. And in situations where nutrition levels are increasingly going downwards, we need to support production and support agriculture. We need to support small farmers also with seed to grow food, support in terms of their livestock. And we are also going to need to consider food support for our citizens. And then there's the social capital. We need to build communities and networks that allow people to work together constructively with regards to food security and nutrition. And so we really need to strengthen our human capital, and for the benefit of those who are the most vulnerable, we need to ensure that we have people who are properly trained to assist them, but we also need to ensure that people become properly educated themselves so that they have an opportunity to earn a salary and be able to have the money to purchase the proper food. So this also would include social protection, social welfare, and we really need to improve the situation of the poorest and most vulnerable families. Thank you so much. Thank you. Let us move to the right-hand side now. Okay, let us finish with the right-hand side and then we'll come to you on the left. Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Good morning to you all. Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. I'd like to greet you all, dear colleagues, and thanks also to all the organizers and those who are behind this session. And also, I'd like to thank all those who contributed and contributed by the presentations that were made on the theme of the Year of the African Union. Mr. Chair, from my following up of the presentations, I find it interesting that presentation in which there are recommendations asking the members of the Parliament, Pan-African Parliament, or members of the Pan-African Parliaments to contribute to the legislations that supports the food production in the African continent. I remember in the year 2019, we had a workshop with the CDC, in which the presenters gave us figures about the impacts of the diseases in the continent. And we learned from there that whenever you are intending to issue legislations, you should have the comprehensive information in order to give concrete and precise results. And here I'd like to, as a member of the Libyan parliament and representative of the Libyan state in this parliament, to say that the state of Libya has been and is still the gate of the African continent to Europe. In Libya, we host millions of the people of African continent, and these brothers and sisters come to Libya in a very dire situations. And despite the situations that you know in Libya, we are always hosting and receiving these people, and they share with us what we have. Most of those who come to Libya are suffering from bad situation. And I remember also in the year 2018 that Libya was accused of practicing slavery or abusing the Africans who came to the country as if they were any other commodity as slaves. We in Libya, we don't have this culture now. It will not be there. Contrary to that, we are always warmly welcome our brothers and sisters. And despite everything in Libya, we are always share with them what we have. So personally, I have visited a number of centers for hosting these people in Benghazi and I saw with my own eyes how these people are suffering and how Libya is struggling to provide them with what could sustain them. I have a question here to the presenter who spoke about the famines and the situations suffered by the people of the African continent. And as I said, that in the CDC workshop, they have a program. They have a program in the African Union CDC where they are using that software to generate figures about the spread of diseases in the African continent. So that software helped them a lot in issuing early warning system of any spread of or breakout of a disease. So my question here, is it possible for you as well in the area of food nutrition security to use these tools in order to use them for detection and early warning system about the spread, breakout of these food security issues? In Libya, as I said, we tried our best to provide them with the need that we have it, but in order to get ready, like many other organizations as well, to be aware of what it might happen in the future. So we're looking about or asking about the possibility of having this software or applications that could help us to, by analyzing certain factors, to contribute to the food security and efforts of the state of Libya in supporting the African people who are coming. So my simple question is, do you use any application or software that can help us in an early warning, as an early warning system to any happening of famine or food scarcity? Also, I wish if the presentation contained some figures and numbers to help us to know about the decisions or actions taken to handle the factors affecting the food insecurity. We know that the different factors that are affecting the food security. Thank you for your attention.
Il serait souhaitable que nous...
Thank you very much. I would like us to keep our comments and questions brief so that we can stick to time. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would also like to congratulate all the speakers for their excellent speeches. And I'm delighted that the theme of the African Union this year is strengthening or building resilience in nutrition on the African continent. We know that in the Sahel, states have serious food security problems. And if you take the example of Niger, besides climate issues, there are enormous problems created by terrorism, and that leaves arable land uncultivated as populations are displaced. And these populations are then obliged to survive on food that is distributed by the government and partners. And the assistance is ephemeral, very short lasting, because the givers or the donors cannot continue forever. And until we have peace in the region, we cannot talk about building resilience in nutrition or food security. So I would like to know what the African Union is doing in terms of security, particularly in the Sahel region, to be able to create an environment where we can talk about food security and nutrition. Thank you very much. There was another hand raised. Yes, you have the floor.
Thank you, chairs and all presenters. I have some pointers and two questions. For food security and nutrition, there are so many challenges for Africa, like our work culture is one problem, and instability of people, and also a policy issue. So we have to need a strategy and a policy, legal documents, and then a system of to produce and increase productivity of around agriculture, our extension system approach and the availability of technology it needs to increase the food security, and it is important to develop nutrition systems and to focus to produce organic products to achieve the food security and nutrition. And also the integration is important. All projects and programs, including responsible institutions, we have to must all stakeholders integrated to reduce the problems and overlapping of responsibility, and also to manage a resource. So integration is necessary for these programs. And also additional idea to capacitate the people skill and knowledges. Already the agenda or issue sensitive to clarify the plan. We have to need a short term and a long term plan to succeed this plan. And we have two questions lastly. The first question is, in what way is the practice of accountability and institution and projects and programs to implementation program? And the second is food security and nutrition need to have high investment, how to solve or how to reduce the scarcity, budget scarcity, how to solve. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Very much. And now I am going to ask our presenter to take the floor to be able to answer the questions or react to the comments. And I have noted that the various comments and questions have been about the link between nutrition, culture, and heritage, nutrition and the security situation, the link between security and food security. And with regards to what was done last year, and what is being done today in terms of the African Union theme, there needs to be a link between these themes every year of the African Union, and we need reports. We need to know what was the conclusion of last year's theme. Did it make a difference to have this theme, so that we can have a better idea of what will happen this year? And then there was another question about early warning systems. Do we have any computer software or other systems that will help us to detect where there is a problem? Then there was an appeal to the African Union and a question as to what the African Union is doing concerning security and terrorism in the Sahel region in particular, where food insecurity is high. And then we also asked where are we going to find the budgets and the funds to be able to achieve this theme, and then also how we're going to guarantee accountability. So I would like to invite our speaker now to please answer the questions and comments made by our Honourable members of parliament. Is he not in the room? Ah, yes, thank you. Yes. Yes, yes, you can answer there.
Sim, pode responder.
Very comprehensive discussion, and I truly appreciate some of the comments that you have highlighted, but also the question. Some of these are quite beyond my presentation, but I think I can take note and report them back to our headquarters because these are very, very vital observations. The issue of land ownership is very key when it comes to food security, and also taking into account not just the colonial legacy with regard to land, but also the gender issues with regard to land is very, very important. Women are very much affected when it comes to land ownership, and also they are the major groups that are vulnerable to malnutrition as well. So the issue of land is quite a very important driver. I fully agree with that, but not only looking at it from this colonial legacy, but also looking at it from the gender issues more broadly. And therefore, with regard to this study, the African Union has a land policy. And I think this is a comment I will take up with colleagues that are dealing with the issue of land ownership and land policy. I believe this program is ongoing, and they may not undertake a fresh study. Perhaps they already have a study. And I think this underscores the importance of sharing information, especially with this August House. So this is something I would take up with the colleague dealing on land. I fully agree that there is need for consistency and perhaps a flow of ideas from the previous theme of the year. Again, this is something that is being handled at different levels, but I will take this comment up to ensure that the theme of this year and the last year are linked in terms of implementation, so that this new theme of the year built on the previous theme of the year. And I think it's also a question of previous one also, yet the cultural heritage theme also built on the silencing the gun, which was the theme for 2020. And you can see there are really a lot of consistencies. As one of the presenters made an intervention before, I think is NEPAT, the outer NEPAT, the issue of the indigenous knowledge in food systems, which is a very key cultural heritage for many African communities, is key. And I think there are clear linkages between this current theme and the theme of last year. And I think I fully agree with your observation. This is something I would take up as well. Now, on early warning systems, this is an area of my competence. I just wait to let you know that the African Union has now established what we call the AMIWAS. AMIWAS stands for Africa Multi-Hazard Early Warning and Early Action System. This program intends to provide accurate risk information before hazard strike and to support member states to take action before they are hit by a disaster. This current early warning system has now started with 3 situation rooms. We now have a continental situation room in Addis Ababa. It began to start operational early this year. and it produces early warning bulletins every Tuesday and Friday. We are planning to have all these centers at our regional economic communities level, but also at member states. And we have now started with Eastern Africa, with Disaster Early Warning Center in Nairobi. And we have Climate Advisory Early Warning Center in Niger, in Niamey, with ACMAT. So these are 3 pilots. We hope to ensure that every member state, every REC has similar system in the next 7 years, so that by 2030, the goal of the African Union is to ensure that every African citizen is protected by early warning system. The current early warning system focuses on a number of hazards. It includes flood, drought, wildfires, and we are making effort to also include alarms for earthquake and other geological hazards. But also, we are working on the system to track pests and diseases. This is important because there are also existing early warning systems, and the issue of integration, as mentioned before, is key. You will recall that the African Union has early warning system for conflict, and we also have early warning system for epidemics in Addis. So the early warning system for natural hazards, and the early warning system for conflict, and then the early warning system for epidemics are now building standard operating procedures to work together and to ensure that information is integrated. Because one hazard trigger a challenge to another. For example, if you have flood can also be a trigger for cholera, and it can also be a trigger for displacement of communities. And when communities are displaced, there may be competition of resources, and this may lead to conflict. So these are integrated system, and I think working together is key. So we don't have an option here. We are working together to ensure that these early warning systems are integrated. The issue of conflict and violent extremism in the Sahel. You would recall that the African Union has a portfolio dealing with this. We have the Department for Peace and Security dedicated to ensure that the issues of diplomacy, mediation, conflict resolution, post-conflict reconstruction are handled at that level. But the issue of Sahel is complex. It's not only a question of conflict. You also have issues of environmental degradation. You have issues to do with climate change. So there is a mix, an intermix of natural hazards, climate change, conflict, really producing an hybrid situation.
Est-ce que vous pouvez...
Excuse me. Can you please conclude? Can you please conclude with the comments? Because we need to move on to our session 3.
Yeah, so I take note of the comment from the Sahel, on Sahel, and I just want to remark that there are a lot of efforts going on, being led by the EU Peace and Security Department, and this is a question I will also take up with them. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Ok, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Let's thank and applaud our presenters. He promised us to refer back the issues he couldn't answer to the African Union Commission. Let's thank him again. Let's move on now to session 3. But let me say that since it's the same presenter that we had earlier on, so if you have any questions on the earlier presentation, you can ask them after her second presentation. So session 3, as I said, will deal with the nutritional situational analysis in the continent. We will be hearing from the first presenter, this is Bibi Kiosi, on malnutrition on the continent, the key drivers of malnutrition on the continent. And the second one, the second presentation, will touch upon the key findings of the study on the cost of hunger in Africa. Without further ado, if the technicians are ready, let's move on. Let's give the floor to Madame Bibi from Auda NEPAD.
Excusez-moi, il y a plusieurs versions.
Apologies. I think that I have a different program of the workshop. I think that we'd rather now invite representative of FAO, Mr. Sukati, to make his presentation.
Nous pouvons inviter Monsieur Sukati.
Mr. Sukati, the floor is yours. Mr. Sukati from FAO.
Nous avons des problèmes avec la technique.
I think we have some technical glitches.
Si la technique est avec nous, on peut passer à la troisième séance.
I think that this session would be moderated by Madame Bibi.
On a un problème d'interprétation.
There's an interpretation problem. Can you hear the interpreters?
Please proceed.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, proceed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much once again. With all protocols observed, Honorable. My name is Mpumuzu Sugati. I'm from the FAO Regional Office in Africa. I will just kindly like to present to you the situational analysis. I know a lot of colleagues, including director, our Assistant Director General in FAO, and the words of the Auda Nepatsi or and Madame Keda of the Sun Movement. They've touched to a lot of, onto a lot of things that I'm going to talk about, including the very good remarks that were made by the African Union at the beginning of the session. So my presentation will really be brief, Honorable, and now I will try to be quick with the presentation. So first and foremost, as FAO, our mission really is to tackle malnutrition in all its forms by accelerating impactful policies and actions across agri-food systems to enable healthy diets for all. So this is the FAO mission that is based on agri-food systems, and the vision is whereby we are seeing a world whereby everyone has got affordable, healthy diets in all households. So this is the mission of FAO as part of the Sustainable Development Goals number 2 and the Malabo targets. The most elevated numbers of people that are undernourished, that are stunted, and that are wasted. It accounts for a greater percentage of stunting, wasting, and the undernourishment. But now of bigger concern now is also the increase now in the number of people that are overweight and obese. So we are, as a continent, now struggling with all the three forms of malnutrition, which is underweight, overweight, and micronutrient deficiencies. So I think those numbers speaks for themselves. The situation is getting worse, and if we continue on this path, it will be difficult for us to attain the Agenda 2063, which is how many years from now? Only 8 years from now. And I think it will be difficult also for us to really attain the Malabo targets, which are only three years from now, as we know. So I think accelerated action needs to be made to make sure that these numbers go down, the trend reverses. So we all know the impact of COVID. It has not made the situation any better. I think its impact has been huge, and I believe its full impact is still going to be realized into the coming few years, because such shocks have a lagged effect. They just don't affect the food systems suddenly, but through time and through different pathways. I think we have talked a lot about the drivers of malnutrition, which are basically conflicts, climate variabilities, and now the COVID-19 pandemic, and of course the climate change issues. Now we call these drivers now the forces of the drivers of malnutrition in Africa. And We also see the recent impact of the Russia-Ukraine war, which has disrupted a lot of supply chains, including food and the agricultural inputs. They've also the conflict has also increased the prices of fuel. So meaning that its impact is not only directly into the agricultural systems, but also indirectly into the cost of production of food and cost of distribution, and feeding into the overall economic challenges of the region as well. And we all know very well that with all these drivers, women and children are also exposed, and other vulnerable groups, including the disabled. I think they are bearing the biggest brunt of all these shocks that are happening in our continent. So what we need to be focusing on going forward is this concept of sustainability in healthy diets. How do we make sure that we sustain, we make sure that our food systems are sustainable to producing healthy food? So when we're talking about sustainability, we're not talking about only the agricultural sector in isolation, but the whole sustainability concept, the economic sustainability, the social sustainability, and the environmental sustainability. So when they all come together, they will converge into that red ring there to make sure that all these factors come together to ensure that we have a healthy nation that is having healthy diets. I think this is important. And it's also crucial to remember that with the environmental aspects, if we go on to make sure that we are producing enough healthy diets for people, but we are forgetting the impact of this production on the environment and biodiversity, then it means we are not being sustainable enough. So this slide is just to show the interconnection of the food systems, and where the potential issues of driving malnutrition can come from. We know that at the basis of everything, the political environment, the program, the institutional arrangements of the countries or the region are extremely crucial, because these policies, the programs, the institutional arrangements must make sure that people are hunger free, the zero hunger and the ending hunger drivers, So this is where you honorable members of parliament come into very, very critical play, because you are the foundations, the foundings of how the economies and the political landscape of the country is driven to make sure that all forms of hunger and malnutrition are eliminated. So all these other areas of food supply, the food environment, the consumer behavior, and the diets, they are all linked to the political and institutional framework of the country, of the region. Now they call it the political will. So the slides there then shows all the interconnections. That's, for example, if production systems are disrupted, for example, because there's a drought, then it will feed into the leaky food that is going into the consumers, into the retail markets, etc. So this is just the system's approach to thinking about the situation. So such that at the end of the day, when you see, for example, a child that is malnourished, the first question is when you want to trace back why that child is malnourished, you can even trace back to the policies and of the country and the institutional arrangements. Are they inclusive enough? Do people have enough jobs, etc., without even going into the food systems itself? So just to make an example of how the COVID has come, the relationship with COVID and malnutrition, we know that it started with the COVID outbreak. There was these shutdowns and there was clogging of the supply chains of food, and at the end of the day, households couldn't have enough food. There was not enough fuel for agricultural production. It affected supply chains of inputs themselves, and also most importantly, the slow economic activities that resulted from the COVID resulted in a lot of job losses, lockdowns, school closures. So there were multiple entry points. When people are laid off from work because of COVID, then the household income goes down automatically, and then the household will have to readjust their consumption pattern, which fuels malnutrition itself. So this slide is just the buttressing the slide that I showed you before, before, that the causes of malnutrition are multi-layered, starting from the basic structure of the economy, the social cultural context. Then you move to the underlying causes, then the immediate causes. The immediate cause of malnutrition is people eating the wrong kind of foods or people not eating enough food. Those are the immediate causes. But there's a long story behind why that is happening. So it is important that as we intervene, or probably we intervene, we help children to fight malnutrition. We start with all these causes in a framework kind of approach, so that we are holistic in finding the solutions. So at FAO, we are using this approach. Our new strategic framework is based on 4 pillars, which is better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better lives, with the critical pillar of leaving no one behind. We know that there are so many accelerators of these, including gender equality, youth issues, inclusivity, and integration of partnerships and collaboration, which is extremely important, the partnerships and collaboration and moving forward together. So this is some of the examples of our interventions based on our strategic framework. One of the important things that I like that has been coming up a lot in these discussions was the impact of data early warning systems. I think this is extremely important. As FAO, for example, we are supporting the CAADP, the Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program, biennial review process, so whereby FAO is leading the ending hunger indicators and the indicators on resilience. So what we are seeing there is that data is extremely crucial and to track our progress. And I think we have to use every forum that we can have to advocate for reliable data, because if we don't have reliable data, we are shooting in the dark, because we don't know the targets, we don't know where we are coming from, we don't know where we are going. So data is extremely important. Once we have the right statistics and we know where we are and we know where we are going, we can use those statistics then to develop what we call evidence-based policies, approaches, and then from there building capacity at country level to run with those programs based on the evidence and reliable data, and then strengthen commitment and collaboration. And I think the role of parliamentarians is everywhere in this 5-prong approach. So this is just a word document of what I've just been saying, using data to inform our work, because it's unfortunate that as we sit into this biennial review process and looking at the quality of the data that is coming in from the countries, there's a lot of work to be done. I will have to say, strengthening the capacity of countries to understand the indicators themselves, besides collecting the data. So it needs a lot of collaboration from different partners, different organizations, and of course parliamentarians are the key holders of what is happening in communities and in countries, and they are extremely critical in this kind of work. So these are some of the issues that we will be supporting. I think the African Union has allocated, eloquently said the interventions that are going on, and FAO is supporting in all these levels, and we will continue supporting as we move forward. And I really like the comment that said that the themes of the year, like the theme of last year, seems to be not connected to this theme of the year. Where is the connection? I think these are some of the things, because if we are going to track our progress, we have to track our progress in a time series kind of approach, you know, where we were and where we are going, and all these approaches need to be linked, you know, because the biennial review process itself and the CAADP is a time series process, because the African continent leaders, in their wisdom and intelligence, they came up with this framework, which I think is brilliant. I haven't seen it in any other continent. But then it needs now the putting the action into this commitment and tracking our progress and strengthening this commitment and the data systems is extremely crucial. So these are some of the key recommendations that we have come up with, and I think they tie up very well with the key recommendations that Auda has mentioned. So I will not repeat them. And I think the recommendations from GEDA, from the Sun Movement, I think they were spot on. They take care of all these recommendations that I have prepared, and I think we will have to keep those in mind since they are well connected. But I think one of the critical thing is support these multi-sectoral approaches is extremely important, and not looking malnutrition as a health thing or looking malnutrition as an agricultural thing, but looking malnutrition as a food systems problem, you know, and embedded in all these regional policy strategies and the economic structures of the countries, and how the institutions are made to support the ending hunger issues. And I'm glad that my colleague at FAO will be talking about some of the legislation and the entry points that we can use to make sure that countries are taking up this nutrition action in a holistic legislative and in a holistic and legislative environment. I thank you for your time.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Asukati. Thank you for this presentation. The interpreter apologizes, but there seems to be some sound interference. There are two people speaking, I think one virtually and one on the floor. So we are going to hand the floor over to our second speaker, and we will have an opportunity to debate afterwards. The interpreter apologizes. We are getting a feed from the virtual environment and from the floor.
Would you like me to wait for a second for that to be cleared?
Je disais qu'on doit passer.
I was just saying that we can move on now to the second presentation by Mr. Ahmad Nuru. And this is the presentation on the key drivers of malnutrition on the continent. You may go ahead now. Thank you.
Excellency, and I would like to really appreciate the invitation to having been invited to come to this conference. So the chairperson of the Pan-African Parliament Committee for Rural Economy, distinguished speakers and guests, FAO rep, UN Assistant Secretary General, all protocol observed. Thank you for this opportunity once again. I will try to be brief. And just to say, I'm sorry I could not be there physically. I was there myself physically yesterday, but the meeting was changed to today. So I had to come back to Addis last night because I had other pressing meetings today. But nevertheless, I will please try to go through the presentation as quickly as possible. Excellencies, members of parliament, I'm not a statistician. I'm just a veterinary doctor who works in WFP. And what I want to introduce today is looking at the POHA studies, the cost of hunger studies in Africa, as one example of what we are doing with the African Union, a good example, a game-changing example that can bring a lot of information to your doorstep and can give you the tools, the bullets you need as MPs to advocate for good policies and resources to put towards food security on the African continent and in your respective countries. So, by way of introduction, really, I don't think we need to go into all the statistics. I know one of the MPs was asking for statistics. We have plenty of statistics. In fact, what I've tried to do was to try to just use this one example of what we're doing and try to bring all the statistics into just one or two or three key figures so that we can use that now as what we need now as stepping stones now to move basically, into action. Because I think we have too much statistics, we have too much reports, we have too much meetings, we have too much visits. We need to make impact at the grassroots level. And this is what this particular study, the COHA study, is trying to address. So really, there's a lot of malnutrition on the continent. Plenty of this is caused by the 4 C's, as has been said by the previous speakers. And I want to just also allude that 68% of the areas where we have severe malnutrition on the continent are in areas which are in conflict, which is really very upsetting, because we should be able to overcome conflict. And I'll maybe talk later on after this session in this a bit more. This presentation I'm going to make right now will be made available to us all, so please, you don't have to think about it. I can make it available to everybody. Next slide, please. So the purpose really of this study, it's a cost of hunger in Africa study, is to provide strong evidence on the social and economic consequences of child undernutrition in order to raise awareness, to build consensus, and to catalyze actions towards undernutrition in Africa. The study aims to generate evidence, which I'm presenting to you today as MPs, to inform you as key decision makers and also the general public about the cost of undernutrition in Africa. So what we hope is that this example of this one study is going to encourage a revision of budgetary allocation within states and within regions, and also encourage policies and practices and also strategic approaches using this data to try to help us overcome the issues that we have regarding malnutrition on the continent. Next slide, please. So this study was done basically in 21 countries in Africa, member states, okay? And it started as far back, and there were many different statutory meetings that led to this study being born, as it were. And these are the 21 countries listed there. I'll not go through them all. But what I'm trying to do here now is to say that in these 21 countries, we have looked at them in depth now, and we're trying to get the analysis and the learnings from this study that can help us now to project what we need to do for the future and on the continent in terms of specific or nutritional kind of interventions. Next slide, please. So, before I go forward, I want to just say that we'll be looking at this study in 3 phases, the COHA studies. One is looking at what is the health costs, what is the education costs, and what is the productivity costs to these 21 member states where the studies have been done. But before I do that, I need to define. There are different terminologies in terms of wasting. You have what we call wasting, you have stunting, you have malnutrition. There are different kind of definitions of this. Now, for the purpose of this study, the health aspects of this study were done for children between 0 and 5 years old. This is what we call literally the first 1,000 days of life, which actually starts before 0, because it starts when a mother knows she's pregnant. If a mother is pregnant and she's malnourished, she's going to give birth to an underweight baby, if the baby is born alive, and a malnourished baby. And those first few years, the first 3 years of life, really, of a baby's life, if a baby is stunted, in other words, has not been nourished properly, the effect of that stunting is permanent for life. You can never reverse it. Even the brain size, the cognitive ability is all completely retarded for life. Then the second part of the study is looking at the education impact, which is looking at kids between 6 to 18 years of age. This is where we normally have malnutrition. Some of the malnutrition is complicated with the stunting as well. Then the third part of the cohort is looking at the productivity, which is looking at when they start working, and it starts as early as 15 up to 64 years. But what I would like the MPs to please recognize is that stunting happens very early, before the age of 3, certainly before the age of 5. It is normally permanent, and no matter how much food you give afterwards or treatment, you cannot reverse stunting. It's permanent, and the effects of that are permanent throughout life. Whereas malnutrition can be treated, it can be controlled, but it takes a long time depending on where and the kind of resources you want to use. Next slide, please. So we will look first of all at the cost of health, or health costs in terms of undernutrition. And this is really saying that we estimated that about 24.5 million clinical cases that we looked at in the 21 member states where we undertook the study, and we tried to estimate what is the cost of poor health due to malnutrition. And what we came out with was roughly, it was about $3.2 billion that it cost those 21 countries. So this is over 21 countries, by the way. Treating a severely underweight child, for example, requires a comprehensive protocol that is often much costlier in monetary value than if you prevent the malnutrition before it even set in. So this is a classic case where prevention is better than cure. It's much more costly to treat if it has already happened. The economic cost of each of these cases that we're talking about here has increased, in terms of the management of this cost of undernutrition. So these costs are generated significantly as a burden to the public sector, the healthcare sector, and also to the household. But it has been estimated at approximately $3.2 billion. Next slide, please. If you look at the education costs are with the children between the ages of 6. Please note, some of these children that come to school at the age of 6 may have already been stunted from birth to the age of 5 already. So they already come in at a disadvantage. But children who suffer more from undernutrition before the age of 5 are most likely to repeat a class compared to those who are not affected by undernutrition. And this repetition has a direct influence on the cost of the schooling for the parents and also the school system itself and the families. So there's quite a lot that you can look at in terms of this. But looking at this data, we found out that roughly 14% of stunted children, repeat a class, as opposed to only 7.5% of children who are not stunted. So repetition in schooling has a direct cost implication for families and the school system. Students who repeat grades, they put more burden in terms of financial burden on the education system because they require twice as much to be spent on them in terms of resources because they have to repeat the year. In addition, there's also taking care of that child at home, with extra food and things like that. So the study was done on more than 2 million children in these 21 member states who repeated the grades. And these are the kind of figures that we're coming up with here, with a final overall for the 21 member states, of about $345 million in terms of loss, which is a huge amount of money, both for the parents and also for the school system. If we go to the next slide, this is looking at productivity. Now, productivity, like I said, is for ages from 15 all the way up to 64, which is your productive life. And we found that child undernutrition affects human capital and productivity in different dimensions, in different ways. One way in which it affects is reducing the income potential for non-manual work, Non-manual work. So kids now who are undernourished and they're not going into the manual labor like factories or working on farms, but going into things like administration and things like that. But because they had lower education levels, because they were unhealthy, it had a significant cost. It's also looking at those children who became adults and went into manual intensive activities, so casual laborer, farm workers, factory workers, things like that. Because they were malnourished when they were young, their bodies are not able to cope with those kind of intensive production, and it has a very big loss in terms of productivity and time and things like that, and also sickness. And of course, there's the last one, which is looking at reduced productivity, because many of these children, they actually die when they now get into the workforce, or before they get in, or they're not even there to go into the workforce because they have died. And the total amount of cost that we're looking at these 21 countries, roughly, is approximately $26 billion. And the largest share of this productivity loss is because of lost productivity due to undernutrition, okay, health issues, and also deaths, which represents about 62% of the total cost. Next slide, please. So we've tried to put in this slide an overall aggregation of all this. And we're putting now into country, the losses on productivity, the losses on education, the losses on health, and we're trying to link it now to give MPs a rough idea of what it means in terms of GDP, your country's GDP, for these 21 countries, by the way. So it comes out to roughly, in 21 countries, about $30.4 billion US. I recall that the Undersecretary General of the Sun Movement, she was saying on average it's about 11% on average. But if you work it out, it does come to about 11-12% on average. When you have the lowest of the lowest, looking at countries like Egypt, which are not doing too badly with 1.9% of GDP, to countries like Ethiopia, which is up to 16.5% of GDP. So roughly about 11%, across the board. $30 billion, honorable MPs, is a huge amount of impact on Africa. You can imagine what that can do. And you can imagine if we can control those losses and what we can put that money now into food security, into children, nutrition. It's an amazing amount of money. Next slide, please. So I will not bother you too much with this slide. I'll just skip over it because it's looking at, we were trying to do an analysis of some of the scenarios in order for us to meet the Malabo Declaration. But for sure, what we know here is that currently the global stunting rate is about 21.3%. But Africa, on average, has the highest prevalence of stunting at about 33% of underweight in Africa, which is very high. So the call for action here is that we need to really act on this now. And we need to bring on average in all our countries between 4.6 to 5% reduction every year if we are going to have any chance of meeting the 2025, 2030 targets. I will go now to the next slide, which is the recommendations. But I want to just confirm that everybody can hear me. If not, please, can you just raise it on the comments so that I can know that there's a problem. But some of the recommendations from the POHA study include to raise the priority given to the prevention and control of malnutrition and stunting, especially stunting, because stunting is permanent, like I've said. You cannot reverse stunting. I did some work in India many years ago in WFP, where we looked at the brains, we scanned the brains of children who are normal and those who are stunted. And the brains of those who are stunted was half of the size of those who are normal. And that's permanent. It goes with them throughout life. So how can we raise the priority in terms of prevention and control of malnutrition and stunting? 2, to strengthen leadership and governance and multi-sectoral response towards malnutrition. 3, to improve the policy environment, which is why we're presenting to you here today, and looking also at things like social safety nets, school feeding, homegrown school feeding, fortification within homegrown school meals, things like that. These are all simple tools that we can use to improve significantly the response that we can get. And also looking at strengthening communication of social behavior, monitoring that we are making progress, and prioritizing multi-sectoral nutrition strategies, of which we have many in Africa, many. I can list, there are so many. They are there. So we also need to look at mainstreaming gender outcomes, because anemia is a huge problem also in Africa, which is loss of blood, especially in female students or female children who are about to come into puberty and also into the workforce. So we have to look at that and addressing pregnant mothers as well, and to plan for more stable continued financing into child nutrition at very early stages. Next slide, please. So the way forward, basically what I've done is that I've shown you good evidence, strong evidence. I've given you the bullets now which you need as MPs to fight for more resources, to dedicate these resources towards child malnutrition and addressing child malnutrition, because it follows a child throughout life to adulthood. It follows a country in terms of productivity, in terms of how we need to move forward. So the cost of hunger study is a report which we have. It's still an ongoing study, and it has been passed and recommended by different STCs, which is our technical committees, and, especially the ministers of health. And I think the methodology that we have used for this is a very difficult, very long-term, very complex way of trying to address this. But finally, we have some clear, good recommendations that are coming out of this. And we're trying to give these bullets to you now, so you have the gun and the evidence to fire this and to make sure that we invest in this for the rural grassroots, who are the people that you represent as MPs. The last slide is just showing that we have other studies that are ongoing, such as COFAN studies, cost of food and nutrition in Africa, and to say that many domestic local resources have not increased their budgets towards not just food security, but specifically social safety nets for children, where you have malnutrition is highest. And therefore, we all know that the youth are our future. We have to invest in them. You represent the grassroots, and therefore I'm sharing this presentation with you. Please, we have a lot of data and systems, early warning systems. We know about these things. The question is not knowing them, but how do we translate this now into actionable items on the ground? I would like to thank you very much for listening to me, and I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this presentation. You have given us evidence on the impact of malnutrition on health, productivity, etc. And we have listened attentively to the recommendations that have been made, and I'm sure that there are a lot of questions and comments. But before we go to questions and answers, I would like the NEPAD to first present on the handbook for parliamentarians on nutrition and food systems. If the presenter is ready, I would like to move straight on to that presentation on school nutrition before we move on to questions and answers.
Hello, sorry if I understood correctly. Is this about the presentation of the handbook on food systems and nutrition? Yes. Okay, great. Thank you so much. And it is a pleasure to be with you virtually today to address this distinguished audience and present the handbook on food systems and nutrition. And as was mentioned at the beginning by Ms. Verburg, this handbook was developed by a range of partners, the Interparliamentary Union, FAO, together with the Sun Movement, NEPAD, the World Health Organization, and UNICEF. So this really broad partnership reflects the importance of collective action on nutrition and the recognition that parliamentarians are key stakeholders to advance the nutrition agenda. So the Interparliamentary Union brings together the world's parliaments to work for a world that is more peaceful, democratic, and equal. And nutrition is clearly central to this vision because it is not only about feeding the hungry. It requires the promotion of healthy diets, an assessment of environmental impacts of producing and consuming food, the inclusion of equity considerations within all components of the food systems. So action on nutrition has really a great potential of boosting economic and social development, which also means that in turn, inaction has great costs for societies and families and individuals. And so really you as parliamentarians are uniquely placed to make a difference. You can work with civil society, other stakeholders to ensure that this is a top political priority and raise awareness among your constituents, the public. You can back laws and budgets that support your country's objectives on nutrition and food security and monitor the effect of these laws. And the handbook is precisely designed to help you in these efforts. So let me see if I can just show you what it looks like. So if you're able just to see the cover and some of the content, and there is a link also, the handbook is available on the IPU website and on the website of partners that contributed to it. So I invite you to really have a look and download a copy. It is available in English, French, and Spanish. And the handbook really takes a comprehensive approach to nutrition to show how the different actors and processes and interactions that are involved in the production of food and distribution and consumption, they all shape diets and nutrition outcomes. So for the different components of the food system and the different phases of food production and consumption, the handbook provides some clear entry points for parliamentary interventions with concrete country examples and concrete examples of actions that you can take in terms of legislation, budgeting, oversight, and representation. And there is, in particular, in the handbook, a strong focus on legislation, as was mentioned also by previous speakers. This is a key aspect because there are different levels of engagement that are necessary. As you know, the strongest recognition of the right to food is by enshrining it into the constitution, and some countries, a few in Africa, have already done so. In addition, there are framework laws that set out main obligations and mechanisms that can bring coherence to food systems in a country. And also there will be later a presentation on a draft model law on food and nutrition security in Africa that will be useful in this regard. And then there are, of course, a number of laws in different sectors, such as health, agriculture, education, women's rights, and more, that affect the realization of the right to food. And it is important that these laws are also reviewed with a nutrition lens. So, advances have been made throughout the African continent, and the handbook also provides some examples, such as in Kenya, where the right to food and basic nutrition for every child is mentioned in the constitution, and the parliament passed some aligned legislation on breastfeeding. There is also the example that is mentioned of Burkina Faso, where there is a parliamentarian network for nutrition security that advocated, among others, for an increased budget for nutrition. And also workshops and platforms like the one provided today are really instrumental for mutual learning, for sharing and finding solutions to common challenges. So we really hope that you will have a closer look at the handbook and that it will be a useful tool that will support you in advocating on the importance of nutrition and food security, and that it will help you to identify some actions that you can take forward in your parliament and in your country. Thank you very much for your attention.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you for all the information that you have shared with us, and everything that we can find in the handbook. That is well noted. Thank you. And now I would like to ask Mr. Sise Yeshenyu from the FAO to speak to us about the draft PAP model law on food and nutrition security in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Your Excellencies, honorable parliamentarians, and ladies and gentlemen. I hope Okay. I hope the technical glitch is resolved. I understand that we have been following a series of virtual presentations. I hope, Mr. Chair, you agree with me that it makes a lot.
I'm sorry, Chairperson, but we cannot hear the speaker, those of us who are virtual. Over.
Can you hear me better now? Can you hear me better now?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes.
So I was just saying that you agree with me that after listening to a series of virtual presentations, it makes sense that you have somebody in front of you speaking. I'll be addressing the collaborative work between FAO, the Pan-African Parliament, and the African Union Commission on a model law on food security and nutrition in Africa. I'll try and highlight some of the process-related issues, where the mandate emanates from without spending too much time on it. But most importantly, focusing on the process of developing this draft model law, and most importantly, drawing your attention to the main contents of the model law, and the process of regional consultation that it has gone through, and some key messages for you to carry with yourself in moving forward. In terms of the basis for the development of this model law, as you would know, the African Union Constitutive Act establishes the Pan-African Parliament as a consultative body, an advisory body with some legislative aspects to also provide to support the socio-economic integration of the continent through the harmonization of policies, among other things. This is the present mandate relies on the third protocol from 2001, but there is a pipeline protocol which is not yet into force, the Malabo protocol from 2014, which explicitly gives mandate to the Pan-African Parliament to develop model laws. Next slide, please. It's based on this mandate that the Pan-African Parliament started the process of developing a model law, which is aimed at a number of benefits for members of Parliament as well as member states of the African Union. The first one being domestication of international and continental obligations that you find in different legal and policy documents of international as well as continental nature. The second one is to harmonize interrelated cross-border related laws with relevance to food security and nutrition. And the third one is to provide guidance in new technical areas for member states who wish to develop laws in those areas. And in terms of benefits, the presence of a model law makes it easier. It's an easy, cost-effective reference material, evidence-based reference material for member states in their efforts to develop laws. Next slide, please. In terms of why we need legislation in the first place in the area of food security and nutrition, whatever my preceding colleagues, the presentation from FAO as well as WFP and the previous presentation from IPU on the handbook, they have laid out the essentials of, let's say, the achievement of food and nutrition security, what needs to be done. If you especially see the recommendations provided by the presenters, what a legislation tries to do is to encapsulate those recommendations into a legal framework, which in the first place lays down a long-term commitment on the part of the states, and secondly, it defines rights, obligations, and responsibilities of different actors, not only state actors, but also non-state actors, towards achieving that goal of food and nutrition security. And Not only that, in addition to assigning responsibilities, often food and nutrition security laws would establish a coordination platform, considering that food and nutrition security is a cross-cutting matter, which invokes the mandate of different public and private as well as civil society organizations. Such laws try and create a coordination mechanism, what we call food and nutrition governance frameworks. And once such laws are put in place, they would require the states as well as other actors to allocate budget to commit for the implementation of those laws. And last but not least, such laws would establish accountability mechanisms, responsibility for not meeting XYZ, for not carrying out obligations. In terms of why we need a model law in the area, you'll find that most countries, including from our studies in the African continent, they have food security and nutrition policies, programs, institutional responsibilities. And a number of countries have also developed legislation in one or more aspects of food security and nutrition. As you could see on the right side, examples on laws relating to food reserves, the establishment of the mandate of relevant institutions, on school feeding, on child nutrition, food fortification, and more importantly, on food safety and emergency-related issues. Now, what you find in practice from our study so far is that there is a bit of disintegration in terms of where you find food security and nutrition-related legislation. In some countries, there is emerging practice of developing comprehensive laws that cover most aspects of food security and nutrition. For example, in Zanzibar 2011, Cabo Verde developed a law in 2018. And from our study, we also have seen that a number of countries have laws in the pipeline, some of them listed here. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of the genesis of this draft model law that we talk about today, a collaboration between FAO and PAP started in 2017 after PAP established the Pan-African Parliamentary Alliance on Food Security and Nutrition. We developed a TCP that was launched in the end of 2017. Already in 2018, we started rolling it out. In May 2019, in February 2019, there was a two-day training here in the Pan-African Parliament headquarters where we took parliamentarians through the different elements of food security and nutrition, from the technical as well as the legal and budgetary aspects. And I think you would agree with me, Mr. Chair, that it's also time to probably repeat that kind of training for incoming parliamentarians, depending on the priorities set by PAP. Next, in May 2019, we developed a policy paper that scans the landscape of legislation in the African continent in the area of food security and nutrition. We looked at over 170 pieces of legislation from about 35 countries to see existing practices. How do they look like? What are the existing legislative frameworks? So that we can have evidence base for the drafting of the model law. So we did some internal consultations within the AU mechanism, and in May 2019, it was deliberated upon by the committee and finally endorsed for regional consultation by the plenary in October 2019. From November 2019 to November 2020, we held regional consultations on the draft with a view to gather comments from stakeholders from member states. And then only this year, after a bit of a hiatus, as you know, within the structures of PAP, we had an opportunity to sit down as a committee of experts from FAO and PAP to integrate the comments that we collected from regional consultation over the 2 years. We did this in April 2022. And now we plan to have hopefully a technical consultation and have the draft model law adopted hopefully within the AU Year of Nutrition, because it really makes a lot of sense to do that, hoping that the plenary as well as the committee takes this proposal on board. So as I indicated earlier, when we did the assessment, the policy paper, what we tried to look at is what forms of legislative frameworks exist within the African continent, what options can we follow in terms of contents and structure for the model law, and what exact contents can we include in this model law draft. So we found out that there are different practices in terms of the forms as well as contents of legislation. We opted to develop a model law that can cater for the different forms of legislation that we find in the African continent. Next slide, please. And in the draft, we go with a little bit of an assumption from practice that food security and nutrition policies that are anchored on legislation will help translate international and regional commitments into more concrete obligations at the national level. They can provide guidance for countries in their efforts to develop legislative frameworks, but also they can bring together issues that may be found in different legislation, but can better coordinated in terms of addressing food and nutrition security issues. We had in mind the idea of this flexibility, ensuring flexibility of the model law so that it can be adapted to different contexts. So overall, there are, next slide please, 3 main components that you find in the draft model law. For some of you have had the opportunity to have a look, but also for you to have a look in the next few weeks, hopefully, because we have it ready after the integration of the comments, but only in English for now, couldn't be distributed. So what you find is definition of rights, entitlements, as well as provisions for groups and individuals. The second pillar is the duties and responsibilities of not only states, but also non-state actors. More importantly, there are provisions that create enabling environment for coordination among the different institutions, relevant stakeholders, but also to ensure accountability in the whole system, in the whole process of the value chain, from production all the way to consumption of sufficient, safe, and nutritious food. Overall content, I'm not going to take too much time in terms of what the, next slide please, what the contents of the draft model law are. I think you'll have the opportunity to read in detail and interact with us at some point. But to brief you on the main contents of the draft model law, it starts with the title, the preamble that defines what is the basis for the development of this model law and what purpose it will serve. Then it's the purpose and scope of it, that it aims to guide, to provide evidence-based guidance for member states in their efforts to develop legislative frameworks in the area. It can cater for different forms of legislation. Essential terms are defined, but most importantly, as the draft follows a human rights-based approach to development with a view to look at food security and nutrition from the right to adequate food perspective, we define what right to adequate food means, what a rights perspective to food security and nutrition looks like. Then goes on to define obligations of state and non-state actors, from the whole idea of not intervening with people's efforts to feed themselves, all the way to providing amenities in case of emergencies. Next slide, please. In this part, what you see is a formulation of what the main determinants and pillars of food security and nutrition are. I think you agree with me that there are three ways of accessing food in normal as well as abnormal circumstances. One is to produce food, okay? To produce food, you would need to have access to productive resources like natural resources, land, fisheries, water, forestry, biodiversity. So their secure access as well as sustainability is determinant. Second, access to inputs, agricultural inputs like fertilizers, pesticides, especially for those small producers. Related to that is also access to technology, support for cooperatives, producers' organizations, and equally importantly, prevention of food waste and food loss, so that what is produced goes for consumption. So this is at the level of production. If an individual doesn't produce his or her food, the next option is, of course, to procure that food from the market. So the law, the draft model law, as well as laws of different countries, regulate how food is marketed, starting from import and export of food, but also marketing at the national level with a view to ensure the safety of food, to protect consumer rights, but also to ensure there is sufficient food supply in the market, including control of prices whenever necessary for staple food, without, of course, contradicting with obligations relating to international trade. So regulating food market and trade, including import and export, food safety, quality standards, regulation of food labeling, marketing, advertising, food fortification of locally produced as well as imported food, maintaining and managing strategic food reserve. These are the kind of issues that you would look at within that context. But I must note that those lines that you see in white, they often come up with, they often form a separate legislative framework at the national level because they imply different institutional responsibilities. This is particularly the case for food safety, which relates to import, which relates to standardization and related issues and needs separate authority. But it doesn't mean that food security and nutrition legislation do not somehow provide guidance in that area. Now, if a person doesn't produce food, they get it from the market, as we said, not necessarily supermarkets in the African continent. We get them from our local markets as well. Safety applies in that context. In the unlikely situation where people cannot either produce or buy food from the market, in the context of emergencies, for example, there comes into the picture this idea of provision of food for those in need. For that, you would need to have some pillars within the food security and nutrition legislation. One of them is what we call strategic food reserve. A number of countries have this, especially for staple food, assigning an authority. But this is not necessarily for emergency situations, but also when there is shortage of supply of food. A number of countries have this. Then school food and nutrition, this may happen not necessarily in the context of emergencies, but there is a close correlation between provision of food in schools and the performance of students, and also local procurement, because it's often related to the local market, from local agriculture from which products go to school food. Then you have the social security schemes, social protection schemes that need to be put in place to prevent people from getting into this situation of not being able to feed themselves. But if it so happens, so that people have some social safety net support, so they can get out of that. Special measures of protection for vulnerable groups is also particularly catered for. We're talking here about lactating mothers, IDPs, and people in particular situations, both mutable and immutable categories in many ways. So the details are also provided in there. Another very important pillar, I'm coming to an end, Mr. Chair, I understand the pressure of time, is the administrative and governance framework. Often, food security and nutrition responsibilities are assigned to different ministries at the national level. In the countries I have worked in a number of countries, I've seen food security falling often within Ministry of Agriculture, nutrition falling with the Ministry of Health. It may differ from country to country. Countries define responsibilities, right? But considering that food security and nutrition is a cross-cutting issue, it has trade aspects to the extent that you import food. It has safety aspects, then you bring in the standardization authority. There is a need for coordination platform to ensure that food security and food and nutrition security objectives are met at the national level. So what we propose here is that there should be that governance framework, coordination platform. Often, that platform should have a level of independence and autonomy. It functions well from practice when it is coordinated by highest level of government so that it gets the attention it deserves and the necessary budget allocation it also deserves. It should also have a decentralized structure at the national level so that all interrelated aspects of food security and nutrition are addressed in an interrelated way. And another important pillar is, of course, the food security information system that needs to be put in place with a view to gather data on the situation of food and nutrition security, anticipate possible shocks, but also put in place early warning mechanisms so that it can be rolled out when there is a analysis or synthesis of an emergency situation that is in the horizons. And then, of course, a number of countries have this disaster risk reduction authorities, responsibilities provided for them, so that there is preparedness as well as effective response to emergencies. Here we have included not only natural disasters that we know, but also what we have learned from COVID pandemic. So the need to allocate resources, to put in place accountability mechanisms and other provisions are also included. Fast forward on what we received from the regional consultations, we have cleared some doubts about the nature of model laws. Some representatives told this is binding on states, but the idea is not about bindingness or non-bindingness. It's rather to provide evidence-based guidance for countries when they embark upon their own will to develop legislation on food security and nutrition, which we think is very important and crucial to address food insecurity and malnutrition at the national level. The language of food security and nutrition, we received some comments. We received a comment that we should integrate gender equality as a standalone principle, sustainability and good governance issues, including the usage of food for political purposes, some comments we received. We were told that the original draft focused very much on agrarian production. We needed to put focus on livestock, fisheries, and other source of food security. We did that in the revision. But also to include food waste and food loss. I'm sure the august gathering here is aware of these concepts. Food loss is what we lose at the level of harvest, at the level of production and collection, whereas waste is once it makes it to the market, not using that food is also a problem. There is a need to address that in the context of a legislation as well. So we also received comments on how does minimum wage relate to food security and nutrition. The idea is we are not getting into labor law here, but rather saying that whenever you put in place a mechanism for the determination of minimum wage, it should take into account the price of food, affordability, and related issues is the point. We received comments to include specific provisions on climate change and public health emergencies like COVID, which we did. We were also told to include the role of refugees, not only as groups to be helped, but also groups that contribute to production of food in a number of countries. But also in terms of cross-border food trade, we were told that there is a need to include provisions on how to harmonize legislation relating to cross-border food trade. So we did that in the revision, and I hope you'll be exposed to the revised version very soon so that you can accelerate the adoption of this instrument. I think, last slide, please. We really advocate for you to embrace this draft model law and have it adopted as soon as possible, because we think policies, food security initiatives at the national level, if they are anchored on legislation, they become more effective. We have seen this from experience in a number of countries. That's one. Second, this model law brings together all food security and nutrition related issues from a legal perspective into one instrument. Even if you want to adopt a law on one specific issue relating to food security and nutrition, you can use this model law. Third, it follows a human rights-based approach. This has come out repeatedly in the previous presentations, and that makes it very important in terms of addressing food security and nutrition. Third, it combines responsibilities, rights, obligations, together with a coordination mechanism, what we call food security and governance framework, that makes sure that any initiative, effort at the national level to address food security and nutrition will be more effective through a coordinated mechanism. And most importantly, it includes accountability mechanisms when obligations relating to food security and nutrition are not carried out. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for taking long, Mr. Chair. We hope to receive some comments from you. Thanks.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Cisse, for this presentation. Let's open discussions on the 4 presentations. The key drivers of malnutrition, the key findings of the study, and then the handbook, as well as the model law. Let's please be as brief as possible in our questions and comments, because we need to stop at 1. We'll go to 1:30. I see hands raised. Yes, the floor is yours.
Recognizing me, my name is Daz Mate, MP from Zimbabwe and a member of the Education Committee, being the Vice Chair. Mr. Chair, to me, all the speakers, though they were many, but to me, they were bringing the same message. The same message, all centered and around the issue of malnutrition and the food security in Africa. Mr. Chair, I would like to think that, as I've said, to me, it sounded the same message. It's all about our parliaments in our member countries, in their budgets, making it sure that food security is budgeted for and is given enough percentage so that that particular country does not suffer and produce children that have food shortages. Again, it reminded me of a budget towards the fertilizers, all implements, farming implements, that they should also be priced at very, very low prices so that those that are ready to do farming for our member countries, they do that farming while they don't suffer much for the cost of prices. Thirdly and lastly, the change of weather, which is uncontrollable and no one can control it. We then make sure that our member countries, Mr. Chair, divest to gardening, green gardening throughout the year, so that we don't wait for rains as they've already changed patterns. And this would assist us to make sure, as Africa, we move away from food shortage. Thank you very much.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Let's stay on the left. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and congratulations to all the presenters. I would like to talk about school nutrition. This is extremely important for our children because with an empty stomach you cannot learn much. And I have a question regarding nomadic populations. And very often these nomadic populations move according to where there is water and feeding for their cattle or animals. But how do we ensure that their children are fed? Let's go to the other side of the room. Yes? Yes, go ahead.
I have a question for both presenters who focus on actually the economic, social, and environmental, especially the first speaker. But I think the political issue is missing. Food security and nutrition, healthy nutrition is highly related with politics. And in this case, I just ask, can we have food security without fast economic growth if we don't have actually a middle level or good level of economic growth as well as political instability? Because in many countries of Africa, both of you mentioned there are crises. So can we actually have food security when there are crises and political insecurity? Thank you.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, a minute. I'm Professor Matole Mutsecha from South Africa. Allow me to say that the continued ownership of African land and control of natural resources by former colonial powers and colonial settlers who violently dispossessed Africans of their land and natural resources is one of the major drivers of malnutrition and stunting in Africa. This means that this legacy of colonialism is a crime against the African humanity. As Africans, we must concede that many of our countries achieved political freedom without social and economic freedom, and that the former colonial powers imposed bills of rights on African countries which entrenched their ownership of African lands and natural resources. Lastly, Chairperson, I propose, therefore, that the AU must put high on its agenda the struggle of the African people for social and economic self-determination. Last but not least, it is not convincing, with due respect, that the problems in the Sahel region are complex. it must be considered that unless and until the problem of that region is addressed, in particular the right of the people of the Sahrawi Republic to achieve their right of self-determination, those problems will not be solved. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Is there another question or comment? Otherwise, I'm going to give the floor to the presenters so that they may respond. There was a specific question on a strategy for school nutrition, and I think that the rest were all comments. Do our presenters have any comments that they would like to make?
Can I intercede some feedback? Thank you very much, Chairperson. So regarding the MP from Zimbabwe, yes, the message is the same, which is, we're trying to empower you as MPs with evidence and the bullets you need to fight for more allocation of resources towards food security and child nutrition in particular. However, let me just say, it's not just a matter of money only, getting budgetary allocation. There are other things that you can do as lawmakers. You can do, for example, now, how do you allocate land to youth? How do you recognize youth degrees? They go to the bank with their degree, they cannot get any access to any money or anything like that. But how do you use your power to make policies and laws that can help now to bring the youth now into agricultural production and things like that? So it goes beyond just the actual monetary allocation, which is very important anyway. The second lady was talking about nomadic populations. Yes, there are different strategies for nomadic populations as well. I was involved in one of these in Sudan when I was country director for WFP in Sudan, where we were training the nomadic populations on how to do community animal health workers. When they were interacting with the farmers, the crop farmers, and how we could give them markets access. You sell your cows, we buy your milk, we give you veterinary services. So there are such programs, radio programs, and things like that. We just have to look at where they are, but it's all there within the CASA, the Continental Strategy for Education Strategy for Africa. The third speaker was talking about politics. We can never run away from politics, Your Excellencies. But the bottom line here is that really, we are starting to see now with this trend that we're seeing with the Ukraine war and things like that, where the dependency of Africa for its food supply, its basic food eating is coming from outside Africa, is really very, very worrying. And I'll talk about this maybe when I have my next presentation. But there are things that can be done. And the powers that be, governments are going to start seeing issues with citizens protesting about food prices and coming out on the streets to come and protest. We have seen this in Sri Lanka. We're seeing it right now even in South Africa yesterday when I was there. It was this same thing coming up now. If governments do not address food, basic food, then we're going to have serious political disturbance in Africa. So this is something which has to be addressed and can no longer be kept under the table. The last professor from South Africa, ownership of the land, I agree with you, sir, 100%. The past is the past, but we cannot dwell too much on that. We have to use that now to see how we can move forward. I can tell you right now, Zambia is a classic example of this, where Zambia has either passed or in the process of passing where youth can be entitled to 100,000 hectares of land is being put aside, where the youth now will now be brought in now for agricultural investment and things like that. These are things that you can do. The land is there. Three things that cannot be taken away. One is the land. The land will always be there, irrespective of the government, irrespective of people from outside coming into Africa. The land will always be there. The second thing is the water. We have got the water in Africa. Plenty of water, fresh water, we have got it there in Africa. And the third thing is the labor. 68% of Africans are involved directly in labor, in agricultural subsistence farming behind their house. So they are all involved in it. Those three ingredients are there, and we cannot deny them, and we should take advantage of that, no matter what kind of government we have in place. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. And on this note, I think we're going to close the... Oh, Is there somebody who'd like to take the floor? Please go ahead.
From FAO, I think I would just like to respond to the to two issues. You know, the issue of well, I mean, there's been a lot of talk that we need to achieve food and nutrition security. A lot of the times we need the farm inputs and all these things, and then there was this issue that came recently. Nothing can move without political will. So it's just to say that to the honorable parliamentarian who said nothing can move without the yes, politicians are, like I presented in my presentation, the political landscape is the number one factor because it drives the economy, it drives the job, the kind of jobs that people have, it drives the kind of water, the settlement, etc., all which has the impact on food and nutrition security. And then on the issues of land, I think that is a very, very critical issue. There is no investor that can come to invest in a land without clear land rights. It's as simple as that. And if there are no clear land rights, as economists, we talk about the tragedy of the commons. If there is no clear land rights, people will abuse that common resource until it's run down. You know, we are seeing all these issues of land degradation and everything because of all these issues of no clear land rights. So I am 100% with you, Professor, there when you say that the issue of land ownership should be addressed as soon as possible. And I think it's one of the critical issues that Africa must look into, especially access to land, not only for youth and also for women, because land drives economic growth. It's not only land, even rights to fishing, to fishing areas, the rights to seas and everything. All those things need to be taken into consideration, and I think they are extremely critical to get the continent out of poverty. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. And I would now like to begin closing this session. I think we've had a very rich session full of very good presentations, comments, and questions. And I would like to stress some of the points that came up during the last presentations, the quality of good data. We heard about the model law, that we will hopefully be able to internalize. And now I would like us to move on to the last session. We're going to have some very brief comments during this session, some brief presentations, and then we are going to finish off with some recommendations. So if the technical team is ready, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Hamed. Is Mr. Hamed with us?
Possible. Thank you very much, Excellencies, and once again for being allowed to address you. I want to just go very quickly through the World Food Programme take on the theme of African Union as it is for this year. So in terms of food security, I'll not go into that, but this is showing you the map now where we have acute food insecurity all over Africa. And one thing to note here is that many of these countries have active ongoing conflicts. So 68% conflicts areas are food insecure areas. Next, please. So the figures are there. Anemia is bad, stunting is bad, wasting is bad. It's there, you know, and the most important figure here is that the last one there, 63% increase in humanitarian assistance, IDPs, displacements, handing out food to people is what we have seen in the last 2 years because of COVID and now, of course, with the stress of Ukraine and other factors as well. Next, please. Next, please. So I wanted just to put up this, which I think is a very interesting statistics for MPs. If we look at all the staple foods in the world, wheat, grain, which is millet, sorghum, maize, rice, soybeans, all these are very important because they are staple foods for Africa. And if you look at it critically, we find that in terms of exports, Africans are not exporting any of these commodities, none at all. And at the same time, if you look at the countries that hold the global reserves, let's take the first one, for example, wheat. 86% of the wheat is made up of 7 countries exporting, but only 3 countries in the world hold the strategic reserves of wheat. China holds 50%, India holds 23%, while America and Canada have about another 17 to 18%, then the rest for the rest of the world. All these countries now are holding onto their strategic reserves because of the COVID, because of the issues in Ukraine and things like that. None of these countries where you have strategic global reserves are in Africa. So this shows you the dependency that we have. Wheat alone, just wheat alone, African countries, 17 African countries imported $5.1 billion of wheat from Ukraine, only Ukraine, in 2021. This is very worrisome. Next slide, please. So overall, food prices on average around the world, from Sri Lanka to everywhere across Africa, have gone up by more than 25%. Many African countries even more than 45, even up to 50%. This is not just for staples, but also other commodities as well. Next slide, please. What we do as WFP is that we have 4 general areas where we support in terms of the theme of the year. So we have helped in terms of seconding staff and things like that to the African Union to help them with capacity building. But we are also looking into the CADA and leveraging in terms of the fact that we are now the chair. WFP is the chair of the donor group there. But we have been supporting also on the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement that we know about, and trying to, how can we bring the issue of food in there? There is energy, there's infrastructure, but food is so critical. How can we bring that into local production and also regional food production? So we've been doing that as well and supporting technical institutions such as AU, AUDA, and NEPAD, and others. In terms of evidence-based, I've given a classic example today of one of the areas where we have done studies, and we have many of these studies, collaboration with other UN agencies, FAO, OCHA, and others, where we can make this available for you. At the same time, we also have got things like, we produce things like early warning systems. I can tell you right now, where is going to be flooding next year in Africa, the exact location and how many people are going to be affected. But even if I tell you this now, what do you need to do to put the strategic reserves in place right now to do the early warning systems and use it? We have got hunger maps, live hunger maps, where you can access, for example, Malawi, Lilongwe. What is the cost of bread now in Lilongwe today? What is the cost of rice today in Lilongwe? We have got live hunger maps that can tell you all this information. And you can access this through your local WFP country director's office there. We're also looking at supporting programs, especially homegrown school feeding, which has taken off on its own now, which is fantastic, and livelihood projects. Last but not the least, we're looking also at resource mobilization, not just for international bringing money into Africa. We can never continue to survive like that, but looking at how can we take our own resources and move that forward in terms of this space. Next slide, please. So there are many areas that we're helping out with. Africa Day of School Feeding, homegrown school feeding. I have been addressing the PSC, the Peace and Security Council here, because they're not aware of the implications of conflict and how it's affecting food insecurity on the continent. We're looking at the Africa Dialogue series. We helped at Malabo to put on the plate the formation, the establishment of the Africa Union Humanitarian Agency, which is going to be Africa's primary agency. Instead of having WFP and others come in, Africa can handle it. We will come in as technical advisors and things like that. So there are many examples of that. I will just leave it on the slide, which I will share with you. Next slide, please. And then the next slide, last but two slides. So short-term remedies, what do we do? I don't want to just tell you all the challenges and what do we do? In terms of short-term measures, remedies, these are addressing emergencies, displacements, war, conflict, droughts. Right now here, people need to eat. Having access to these areas is what the WFP does in terms of food. We are the first in terms of delivering food. And getting access to these areas, Tigray, all these areas is very important. And therefore, really support measures that can help us to provide humanitarian assistance without any interference is what is important, because we have to save lives. And of course, funding for the humanitarian operations is also very important. Next and last slide. Next slide, thank you. And then in terms of long-term remedy measures, we need to address the 4 C's: climate change, COVID, cost of food, and conflicts. Out of all of this, climate change will always be there for the next 40 years. COVID and other diseases now is monkeypox. Something will always come up. These are all God-made, we can't control, but conflict is one that we can control. Conflict is on our continent is between two or more parties disagreeing. And even those people who are involved in the conflict, the fighters, the Al-Shabaab, the Al-Qaeda, all these, Boko Haram, they also need to eat food. They have wives and children. And they are now not allowing us to produce food on the land because of conflict. They are stealing cattle, they are burning farms. So we need to address these conflicts through negotiation, through mitigation, through compromise. This is the first thing that we need to do. And my last point here also is that really the time has come now with this Ukraine crisis that we've seen to reactivate our African mechanisms. We used to have countries like Zimbabwe being the breadbasket of the whole of Southern Africa. We used to have countries like Ethiopia and Sudan supplying all the wheat that was needed and Guinea corn for the whole of the Horn of Africa. We have Zambia, we have South Africa, we have Ghana, we have. How do we utilize our own land really to become breadbaskets once again and not rely on the dependency of the imports? And one of these things is looking at our traditional indigenous foods and going back to that, and also attracting our youth and our women into the agricultural sector. Like I said, Zambia is allocating a lot of land now to the youth in terms of this respect. Ladies and gentlemen, the WFP remains committed passionately towards addressing food insecurity. Conflict is one of the ones that are the quick wins for us, and we can achieve this quickly. We need your support. Ask us what you want. I can address the PAP on any other thing that you want in the near future. The African Union Global Office for WFP is here in Addis, and we're ready to support you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this brief presentation. I'm now going to ask Mr. Kefilwe to please make his brief presentation. Oh, sorry, it's Madam, excuse me.
Brève communication.
Thank you, Chair, for this special opportunity. Honorables, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. My name is Ms. Kefilwe, not Mr. Ms. Kefilwe Malusi. I'm here representing the African Union Development Agency, known as NEPAD. I'm here to actually talk about the Home Grown School Feeding Program that we are doing with partners such as the World Food Program, FAO, and of course the private sector. Like the previous speakers have said or mentioned, that people have to eat. But within the ADA, NEPAD, and AUC, what we really advocate for is to push the school feeding program to ensure that our school-going children also have something to eat. As we know, ladies and gentlemen, no one can learn on an empty stomach. So we, the ADA and NEPAD, have developed a guideline that will help us to strengthen and reinforce and advance the Home Grown School Feeding Program in Africa. Can my presentation be showcased, please? Okay, I'll just continue talking, but eventually they'll showcase my presentation. As ADA and NEPAD, we started actually implementing the Home Grown School Feeding Program from 2003, and this was done under the umbrella of CAADP. And many of you, or many speakers actually have been mentioning CAADP, which is the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Program Development that was launched more than a decade ago to really push for agriculture investments, push for agriculture production and productivity. If you look at the Maputo Declaration, and there's a 10% committed that member states should actually adhere to in terms of pushing the agriculture production and productivity going forward. And now in 2016, our heads of states have gathered and actually recognized the importance of the Home Grown School Feeding Program. And therefore, every year, 1st of March, we do celebrate the Africa Day for School Feeding. This year, it was the 7th celebration, whereby also we took the opportunity to launch the NEPAD Home Grown School Feeding Program guidelines. And this platform is to encourage the member states really to commit to Home Grown School Feeding Program, to really also learn from other member states that are doing well when it comes to a Home Grown School Feeding Program, to really learn on the practical solutions that we can actually look for in terms of the home grown school feeding program. We are aware that the COVID-19, the other conflicts such as the forces, the cost of food, the climate change, and the price of fertilizers have affected food systems. A lot of schools, for example, they had to shut down due to COVID-19. But how do we ensure that we really advance the home grown school feeding program? How do we restore school feeding program within our respective member states? So these guidelines are therefore to guide further the member states on how to really restore the home grown school feeding program within their countries. And we believe that as honorables here present, you can be our voice on the ground to really push for investment on home grown school feeding program. Now, on the slide, I wanted to show you why we are saying home grown school feeding program is a multiple benefits or multiple cost-cutting in nature. For example, we need all the sectors actually to really contribute to home grown school feeding program. Now, last year during the United Nations Food Systems Summit, home grown school feeding program was championed as one of the game-changer solution, really, to showcase when it comes to food systems what needs to be done on the ground. Home grown school feeding program is a key example that can be used to really overcome the issues of food systems. For example, within ADA and NEPAD, the school feeding program is actually linked to the smallholder farmers. By doing so, we know that we create a stable market for the smallholder farmers. We also talk about empowering our women through school feeding program. In many countries such as Nigeria, Ghana, even South Africa, we have women that actually are cooking for our children. So as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, home grown school feeding is also a game changer. At the same time, our children also receive nutritious meals per day. At least if they can receive nutritious, just one meal per day, that will be a very good practical example in terms of ensuring that our children are really well being fed, and also a way of improving food security and nutrition in the continent and fighting malnutrition in our continent. Honorables, we do have practical frameworks that we use to really advance and strengthen our home grown school feeding program and just nutrition and food security programs at large. For example, many speakers actually have presented the Africa Regional Nutrition Strategy, of which the AUC and ADA and NEPA and other key partners are actually implementing with the support of the regional economic communities in Africa. We do have the Agenda 2063 that you know is actually building the Africa that we want. So within the Agenda 2063, in there also we want to push for more investment on nutrition and agriculture and food security. Within the ADA and NEPAD, we have developed the nutrition and food systems implementation strategy. In there, we also want to strengthen the investments on nutrition and food security, as well as food system going forward. Ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to also share with you the key areas that we have when it comes to school feeding guidelines and how these guidelines were developed. These guidelines were developed by involving the member states. As you know, the member states are the beneficiaries of these guidelines. Without the member states, we cannot implement or roll out the school feeding guidelines. And in the guideline, we do have 5 key elements that speaks to improving home grown school feeding program. Number 1 is on the policy framework. Now, some of the member states do not have comprehensive nutrition-sensitive school feeding policies. So how do we do that? So the guidelines are therefore to guide member states like a checklist in terms of really developing comprehensive national school feeding program. And of course, there's a guide on how we can actually develop that as member states, looking at what is existing and synergizing some of the key policies that are already existing on the ground. The issue of financial capacity, many speakers have been talking about how do we domesticate our own finances as Africa. So we also push for government to take ownership when it comes to school feeding program. During the annual budget allocation, we need to ensure that we do have some budget that is allocated to improve the home grown school feeding program within our countries. The third point is about institutional capacity and coordination. We need a strong coordination when it comes to home grown school feeding program implementation. Not a single sector can actually implement school feeding. No, we need education sector, we need agriculture, we need health, we need social protection, we need private sector, we need our parliamentarians to be part and parcel of the Home School Feeding Program. In terms of design and implementation, which is number 4, we need to ensure that we have a very strong design program for Home School Feeding Program, as well as including our community people to be part of the school feeding program is very, very important. So ladies and gentlemen, the guide is actually available online, but we do have copies that we can distribute today. And this guideline is actually in all 5 AU languages, including Arabic, French, Portuguese, and Spanish, of course, English. At the end of my presentation, I wanted to encourage you as parliamentarians, honorables, that we need your voice on the ground. You need to be our voice to really advocate for Home School Feeding Program, but not just only Home School Feeding Program and other related nutrition and food security activities. As many speakers have mentioned today, we're also here to celebrate the AU Year of Nutrition and also to understand the theme that is building resilience for agrosystems, and of course, social protection is one of them. With that, I'll just wrap up my presentation, and thank you so much for your attention, and thank you for listening. Over to you, Chair.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam, for this presentation. We apologize for the technical issues we had. As you said, documents are available and can be distributed to the honorable members. Let me invite Mr. Baga from CFA for a brief presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable members of the Parliament, it's a great honor and a pleasure to be here on behalf of the African Union CFA to present on what we have been doing as African Union CFA. If you don't mind, I could also do the presentation in French since the PowerPoint should be in English. A quick one.
The CFA, African Union CFA, is a specialized institution of the African Union hosted by Burkina Faso, Ouagadougou, with the goal of girl education over the continent. What we basically did is to make sure that in May, the component of girl education be linked to the theme of the year. I wanted to share with you some sensitive data to show that when the classrooms were closed because of COVID, there have been some 50 million children that dropped out of any educational system. And this is to say that the COVID pandemic seriously affected educational and the educational system, and to understand the number of initiatives that have been taken. I'm not going to dwell on a number of figures or elements because those who preceded me addressed them, especially when it comes to the legal architecture in the African Union Commission. But let me just recall decision of the Assembly and the Malabo Declaration that call for states to take initiatives to promote health and nutrition of children, especially in schools. And school nutrition in rural environments, taking into consideration local productions. I'm not going to go back also to elements that have been raised by, referred to by other colleagues, but let's skip some slides. What we have to recognize is that in 2020, our colleagues from the Department of Agriculture we had this sixth high-level dialogue on resilience in schools, and one of the recommendations of this high-level dialogue that was on the sidelines of the summit of the African Union in Addis Ababa is that the member states would recognize the need to engage or to craft policies in terms of school food and nutrition. And as a result of this dialogue was to act in the member states. This is why the Parliament, the Pan-African Parliament, is really a very good place to make advocacy, to lead advocacy campaigns in favor of school food and nutrition. And because we need really these school programs that are gender sensitive as well, because if the absence of nutrition has an impact on children, but it has also an impact on girls, especially on girls, because if girls can stay in the schools and have lunch in the schools, they can be more able and be in a better position to stay in schools and not to drop out of schools, because this is really a problem in our continent. When it comes to the celebration of the Day of Africa, also during this occasion, we also focused on the issue of nutrition and food in schools and made sure that all the businessmen and women in Africa in agro-business also focus on nutrition, school nutrition and food. And we also produced fact sheets on food nutrition and its impact on the school and education of girls. It might not have apparently any link, but it does have a link, because when you have enough financial resources for food and good nutrition in schools, this keeps girls and boys in schools much longer. As I said earlier, we wish that the Pan-African Parliament help us in this advocacy process in promoting gender-sensitive policies, but also programs that are related to food and nutrition in school, taking into account girls and gender, to make sure that more girls follow more studies in science and technology, but also to have also agronomes, girl or female agronomes, and that can be employed in agricultural institutions and enterprises. We wish as well, as far as the Pan-African Parliament is concerned, that they help us in advocating in favor of the priorities to be placed in the legislative and administrative and political reforms in the African states. We need to reform the African educational system. We need to have more girls in the educational system, and we need really to have solutions, to find solutions to all these problems. And in this respect, CFA has launched Africa Educator Initiative, that is an advocacy in order to take concrete actions to enable the return of girls to schools after COVID, because we are going to live with COVID, but it is important that the African states take measures and arrangements in order to make sure that all girls return to school. And this can be done also thanks to the food program in schools as well. I thank you very much for the opportunity given to the African Union CFA to take the floor and to ask for the help and assistance of the Pan-African Parliament. Thank you very much, Mr. Bubaka, for your presentation and sensitization and your efforts to sensitize the members of the parliament about your actions. I am sure that the members are attentive and are really sensitized. Let me ask if the representative of the International Federation of the Red Cross is available. Is he ready to make his presentation? If not, I'll give 2 minutes to Madame Bibi to make her comment.
Madame Bibi, si vous êtes en ligne.
Madame Bibi, if you're still on the call, would you please take the floor for 2 minutes? If they're not on the call, both of them, let's move on to our last item of our agenda, that is the adoption of our draft final communique. The document has been circulated to the honorable members. May I ask the rapporteur of the committee to read out the recommendations only, since you already have the document tabled before you. If you have any recommendation to make, would you please hand them over to Mr. Galal? He is the committee clerk. Without further ado, let me give the floor to the rapporteur to read out the recommendations.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Committee of the Pan-African Parliament on the 2022 theme really strengthen resilience in terms of nutrition and food security over the continent, the African continent. Reinforcement of agro-food systems and educational system to accelerate the human capital, social and economic development. 22nd of August 2022 recommends Recommendation 1, the involvement of partners in multi-sectoral approaches aiming at sustainably transforming the food systems in order to offer more safer and more secure food regimes. Second recommendation, multi-sectoral coordination in implementing programs, nutrition-related programs and initiatives in order to affirm that the elimination of malnutrition cannot be fought by one single actor, but by uniting our efforts and by crafting strategies for multi-sectoral, integrated and concerted actions. Recommendation 3, to transmit a vote of thanks to the King of Lesotho, the champion for nutrition of the AU, to the Parliamentarian Union, to FAO, to the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent for their precious observations and their contribution to the program of this workshop. Concludes while expressing their deep gratitude to ECA, to EU, to AUDA NEPAD, to FAO, and to the PAP Secretariat for this joint organization of this workshop and for the excellent arrangements taken. Done in Midrand, Republic of South Africa, the 24th of August 2022. Thank you. Thank you very much. Based on your observations that you may just hand over, may I ask you to adopt this final declaration, this final communique? Can we adopt it? Yes? Thank you very much. Honorable members, dear colleagues, distinguished guests, we've come to the end of our workshop. The level of presentations show the interest lent by all of us to the issue of nutrition and social and economic development. We would like to thank all the presenters for the excellent presentations and the honorable members for their comments and contributions. Time has come now for PAP to play its role in helping and assisting the African Union in terms of resilience in nutrition. Well, thanking you once again on behalf of the President of the Pan-African Parliament, we declare closed the deliberations of the workshop on the AU theme for 2022. Thank you very much.
Communiquer,
the two committees will start at 3. We'll resume at 3 with the other committee on education. Thank you.